I turned a semi-truck trailer into a stealth shelter and parked it where no one would look. The thing about a scrapyard at 3 in the morning is that it sounds like breathing. Not like an animal breathing. Not like anything I could name. Just this slow, ambient pressure shift. The metal contracting in the cold. The wind moving through gaps in corrugated walls. The faint percussion of loose chain on chain somewhere in the dark. I've been sleeping to that sound for almost 4 months now, and I still don't like it. But I can read it. I know when the breathing is right, and I know when something's changed. Right now it's right. The chain is tapping the same way it always taps. The wind is coming from the southwest, the same way it's been coming since Tuesday. The infected that wandered into the east end of the yard around sundown are still over there. I can hear them sometimes. This low, shuffling friction against the gravel. Not often. They don't like the dark any more than anything else does. They wander until they hit something solid, and then they just stand there and wait for a reason to move again. I am good at giving them no reasons. I'm lying on a cot that I bolted to the interior left wall of a 53-foot refrigerated trailer inside a scrapyard off County Road 7, which runs east of a town called Killian Junction that nobody outside a 30-mile radius had ever heard of before all this happened. The trailer is the third unit from the south fence, sitting in a row with 6 others, and from the outside, it looks the same as the rest of them. Faded white, a little rust along the lower frame rails, a cheap padlock on the door that's actually open because the real lock is interior and hydraulic, and I installed it myself over the course of about 3 weeks last spring. Inside, it doesn't look like the outside at all, but nobody outside has seen inside. That's the whole point. I've been awake for about 20 minutes, which means it's probably around 4 a.m. I do this a lot now. Wake up in the dead part of the night, with nothing specific in my head, just a kind of background alertness that waits there behind my eyes, like a second shift waiting to clock in. I used to hate waking up at 4 a.m. I used to roll over and check my phone and stare at the ceiling and do math about how many hours of sleep I had left, and get progressively annoyed. Now I don't do any of that. I just lie here and listen, and when the yard sounds right, I let my mind start going wherever it wants to go. Right now it wants to go back to the Flying J on I-80 in eastern Utah, about 6 weeks before everything. I don't fight it when that happens. There's no point. I was coming back from a Reno freight run. Cleaning products, of all things. 3 pallets of industrial floor cleaner and 2 pallets of disinfectant wipes going to a distribution hub in Salt Lake City that would then send them out to grocery chains and hotel supply warehouses. Routine freight. Routine run. I'd done that route maybe 30 times over the years. I knew which rest stops had decent coffee, and which ones had bathrooms that made you feel worse for having used them, and I knew the grade on that stretch of I-80 through the salt flats by feel. You drop into third before you actually need to, because if you wait, you always wait a little too long, and then the rig starts complaining. I pulled into the Flying J around 7 p.m. because I was coming up on my hours and I needed fuel, and I wanted something to eat that wasn't from a bag. The lot was busy. Thursday night, decent traffic, maybe 15 or 18 other rigs parked up in varying states of settled. I backed my rig into a slot on the far end of the trucker section, which I always did because I hate the maneuver of pulling out forward when the lot's full, and walked across to the main building. There was a guy at the fuel desk, a short, wide driver I'd never seen before, with a neck that started approximately where his ears did, and he was talking to the clerk in this low, conspiratorial way that made me slow down before I got to the door. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but the clerk, a kid maybe 19 years old with a jaw that looked like it hadn't fully finished forming, was giving him the specific look that young people give when an older person is telling them something that sounds crazy. A kind of polite disbelief that hasn't yet learned how to disguise itself. I got my coffee. I got a gas station burger which was exactly as bad as I expected, and exactly as good as I wanted. I found a stool at the far end of the counter and started eating, and I noticed the wide-necked driver was still talking to the same kid, and now there was another trucker listening, a woman in a Peterbilt cap who kept crossing and uncrossing her arms, the way people do when they haven't decided yet whether to be interested or skeptical. What he was describing was a rest stop outside Elko, Nevada. He'd been parked there maybe 3 hours before I'd passed through that same stretch, and he said there were 2 state police units and an ambulance in the small lot there, and that the ambulance hadn't left for almost 40 minutes after he arrived, and that when the paramedics finally wheeled someone out, the person on the gurney was strapped down in a way he described as, he paused here, looking for the word, thorough. Like they'd used more straps than standard protocol. Like they'd anticipated a problem. And there was another one, he said. A second person, not on a gurney. Sitting on the curb next to a patrol car with her hands zip-tied behind her, and blood on the lower half of her face that was not, he said very clearly, coming from a wound. Like she'd had her face close to something that was bleeding. He looked around the counter, and I realized he'd noticed me listening. He didn't seem bothered by it. He just looked at me, the way you look at someone when you want to know if they've got anything to add. I didn't. I finished my burger. I said, "What exit?" And he told me, and I filed it away and went back to my rig. I thought about it for maybe half an hour while I drove, not in an alarmed way, more in a background processing way, like a noise you keep trying to identify. The story had the shape of something real, too specific to be entirely made up, too strange to be entirely normal. But I've spent 20 years stopping at truck stops and rest areas, and fuel plazas all over the country, and I have heard some genuinely fantastic claims from people who spend too much time alone at highway speeds. So I did what you do with most things you can't immediately categorize. I put it in a folder in my head labeled, "Probably Something," and moved on. That folder filled up fast over the next few weeks. I've been driving long haul since I was 26 years old. Before that, I was doing local delivery for a produce distributor outside Columbus, Ohio, which was fine, but I could feel the roots closing in around me after a while. Same streets, same sequence of stops, same faces at the loading docks. I got my Class A. I got on with a regional carrier, and inside of 2 years, I was doing the cross-country runs that pay better and take longer and put you somewhere new every 3 or 4 days. People ask me, they used to ask me, back when people were asking each other things, whether I got lonely out there. And the honest answer is no. The honest answer is that I am specifically, structurally suited to long-haul driving in a way that I didn't understand until I'd been doing it for a few years. I don't need a lot of noise. I don't need a lot of company. I need something to look at, and something to think about, and a clear sense of where I'm supposed to be going. And a 42,000-pound freight truck on an open interstate gives me all 3 of those things in one shot. I was married for 11 years. Her name was Donna. We're still technically married, in the sense that the paperwork never got completed, which is a whole other thing. She's in Cincinnati, and she's fine, as far as I know. She was in Cincinnati when this started, and Cincinnati wasn't one of the places that fell in the first wave. Whether it's still standing, I have no way of knowing, because I have been off the grid in a meaningful way since approximately the 3rd week of everything. I don't talk about Donna much, even to myself. It's not a sore subject exactly. It's more like a room in your house that you've cleared out and cleaned and just don't use anymore. Everything's fine in there, you just don't go in. I had a truck, still have a truck, technically, though it's sitting in the lot of a freight depot off I-44 in Missouri that has been empty of living humans for going on 3 months. And I had a route rotation that kept me roughly in the middle third of the country most of the time. I owned a small house outside of Joplin that I slept in, maybe 80 nights a year. The rest of the time I was in the cab. The trailer is mine, not leased. I bought it 4 years ago off an owner-operator who was getting out of refrigerated freight because his heart wasn't doing what hearts are supposed to do, and he needed the money for things more pressing than trailer maintenance. It was a 2011 Wabash, in decent shape mechanically but looking rough. Someone had taken a poor opinion of the left rear corner panel at some point, and the refrigeration unit had been running on spite for probably 2 years. I paid him a fair price for it, did the paperwork, spent 6 weeks replacing the refrigeration unit with a stripped-out interior rack system and some basic electrical, and started using it as what I told anyone who asked was an off-grid workshop. That was the cover story, and it was partly true. I have always liked building things. On the road, you fix what's broken or you're stuck. And over 20 years, I'd picked up enough practical knowledge, electrical, mechanical, basic construction, some plumbing, that I felt genuinely good about making things with my hands. The workshop idea was real, in the sense that I did woodwork in there, did some small engine repair, had my tools organized in a way that I couldn't get them organized in the house, because the house was just a place I kept clothes and mail. But the other part of it, the part that I didn't say out loud to anyone, was that I had a feeling, not a premonition, not anything mystical, just a feeling. The kind you get when you're driving a long flat stretch, and the sky ahead starts doing something, and there's no specific storm on the horizon yet, but something about the air tells you that an hour from now, you're going to wish you'd stopped. I've trusted that feeling with freight decisions for 2 decades, and it's never been wrong in a way that mattered. The feeling about the world was the same kind, but bigger, and I had been feeding it, slowly, with intention, for about 8 months, before the Flying J conversation, and probably 18 months before the thing at Elko ever happened. So by the time the stories at the truck stops started getting consistent, which was about 3 weeks after I first heard the Elko version, I had already insulated the trailer walls, installed the solar array on the roof under a low-profile mounting system that didn't break the trailer's silhouette, run the rain collection pipes along the interior ceiling to the holding tank I'd bolted into the front third, and started stocking the storage bays I'd cut into the floor, with the kind of supplies that you can't buy all at once without someone making a note of it. I was ahead of it, not by much, but enough. The stories got consistent in the specific way that tells you something is real. When you make something up, the details stay the same, because you haven't learned anything new. When something is actually happening, the details change as the picture fills in. The Elko story had started as a guy at a rest stop acting weird. By week 2, it was 2 attacks in a week at different stops in Nevada. By week 3, it was driver forums on CB radio and trucking apps where people were posting about stops in Wyoming, in Nebraska, in Kansas, all saying some version of the same thing. Someone attacked someone else. The attacker didn't stop even after being hurt. In 2 cases, multiple people said the attacker didn't respond to being yelled at, to being pushed, to anything until someone physically separated them by force. And they all described the same thing about the attackers' faces. Not blank, exactly. More like the face had stopped being connected to whatever was usually running it. I called my dispatcher, Neil, who I'd worked with for 9 years. I told him I was taking a break from long routes. He wasn't happy about it. I had a load lined up, auto parts going from Kansas City to Denver, and he needed the truck on it. I told him I'd find him a substitute driver and that I'd check back in a few weeks. He complained, and then he agreed, because he knew me well enough to know that when I say I'm done with something, I'm done. I drove my rig home to Joplin. I hitched the trailer to the cab. I spent the next 8 days finishing the interior. Okay, I need to stop lying here thinking about this. I'm awake, and I might as well do something with it. I swing my legs off the cot and sit up, and the cot frame makes a small creak that I have heard approximately 900 times and still don't like. Sound travels in weird ways inside this box. The soundproofing I put in, 2 inches of closed-cell foam behind the interior skin panels, plus the mass-loaded vinyl sheet I found at an acoustic supply place in Springfield, does a good job of keeping sound in as well as keeping sound out, which is good, and also means that any noise I make in here seems too loud, like being slightly underwater. I reach to the shelf above the cot. I know exactly where everything is in the dark. I mapped it by feel before I ever needed to do it in an emergency, and find my headlamp. I don't turn it on yet, just hold it. The interior of the trailer is 53 feet long and 9 feet wide, and just over 9 feet high at the interior peak. I've divided it into 3 zones. The front zone is about 20 feet, and that's where I sleep and live. The cot, a small table that folds out from the wall, a propane microburner for cooking, storage for food and water, and the main electrical panel. The middle zone is another 18 feet, and that's where I keep the tools. A second water tank, a workbench bolted to the right wall, and the supplies I'm rotating through. Fuel for the generator, medical stuff, clothing, things I've scavenged. The rear zone is the last 15 feet, and it's mostly empty right now, but I've been using it as a staging area when I come back from runs. I drop things there, sort through them, decide what stays and what moves. The whole thing sits on a 1-inch raised composite floor I built over the original refrigerated floor, which runs this vapor barrier system under it that took me 2 solid days to figure out, and probably a week off my life expectancy from stress. Under the raised floor, in 3 sealed compartments accessed by trapdoors in specific spots I've memorized, is the stuff I'm really protecting. My seed stock, a second set of tools, 2 rifles and ammunition in sealed cases, a first aid kit, substantial enough to handle some real situations, and about $1,200 in cash that is now essentially decorative, but that I can't quite make myself throw away. The door system is the thing I'm most proud of. The exterior handle is functional. You can push it, and it rotates the way trailer doors are supposed to rotate. But it doesn't disengage the actual latch, because I've installed a steel bar system on the interior that runs horizontal across both doors and is connected to a pneumatic cylinder I salvaged from an air ride suspension system. To open the doors from the inside, I push a valve handle that bleeds the air from the cylinder, which releases the bars. To open from the outside, you need a key that runs a separate lock cylinder I buried in the exterior skin next to an old rust spot, so it looks like it's just pitted metal if you're not looking for it. It takes me about 4 seconds to go from fully locked to open, and about 6 seconds to go from open to fully locked. I timed it. I turn on the headlamp, red light mode. Red light kills less night vision, and from the outside it barely leaks, even if it leaked at all. Which it doesn't much, because I've sealed the door gaps with foam weather stripping and a rubber compression threshold at the bottom. I check my water gauge first. It's a simple sight glass mounted near the front valve, a tube running from the main tank with marks at 25%, 50%, 75%, and full. It's sitting between the 50% and 75% marks, which is fine. The tank holds 45 gallons. At my current rate, cooking, drinking, minimal washing, I go through maybe 2 gallons a day, which means I've got about 3 weeks before I need to think about a collection run. Rain's been scarce this month. The collection system on the roof feeds a pre-filter and into the tank, but we've had maybe an inch since the beginning of the month. 3 weeks. Not urgent. Good. Food status. I do this check mentally without moving because I know the inventory the same way I know the road to any city I've driven to more than 3 times. I've got roughly 90 days of calories in the front and middle storage bays. Canned goods, rice and beans in sealed buckets, dried fruit, peanut butter, some protein bars that I'm rationing because I actually like them, and I've got limited supply. I've got maybe 60 days of the good stuff, the stuff with actual nutritional balance, and another 30 days of technically enough that I'd be tired and vitamin deficient eating through. I could stand to do another supply run to the Kellner & Sons distribution center off Highway 66, but I've already been there 3 times, and each time I've taken more, which means the next time will show clearly that someone has been in there. I need a new location. I've been thinking about the rail yard. I'll think about it more in daylight. I open the small spiral notebook I keep on the shelf next to the cot. I've been keeping some kind of log since day 12 or so. Not a diary exactly, more like notes to myself, the way you write things on a receipt when you don't want to forget them. Observations, dates and times of things I need to remember. The log has my scavenge records, my supply inventory by date, and some other notes that are harder to categorize. I flip to the current page. The last entry is from 2 days ago, day 114. Distribution center run. Took 6 cans bean soup, 4 cans corn, 2 gallons water, bottled, pulled from storage room pallet, 1 propane canister, found rain jacket in break room, medium, fits okay, infected count on approach, 3 visible on Hendricks Ave, 2 near the depot gate, used the sound trick at the east corner, worked again, back in trailer by 2 p.m., nothing unusual. Footnote from a different hour, the infected by the gate looked wrong. Need to think about that. I stare at that footnote for a while. I wrote it in the margins with a different pen, so I must have added it after coming back, maybe at night when I was processing. I wrote, looked wrong, but I hadn't written what was wrong about them, which means I either hadn't worked it out yet, or I didn't want to write it in plain language. I know which one it was. Let me back up to about day 20-something. because the rail yard idea and the wrong-looking infected are connected to something I noticed early on, and it matters. I'd done my first scavenging run on day 6. Couldn't wait longer than that. I had supplies but not enough, and the structure of what was happening outside had gotten clear enough by then that I knew this wasn't going to be measured in days. What I knew about the infected at that point, I'd gathered from watching through the ventilation slits I'd cut in the trailer wall on the right side. They're about 2 inches by 6 inches, covered with wire mesh and a layer of insect screen on the exterior. And from the inside, I can see a narrow strip of the scrapyard without any light getting out, or any obvious indication that someone is looking out from inside an abandoned trailer. What I'd seen in the first 6 days was this. Infected don't think, but they're also not random. They move towards sound. Not all sound. Ambient noise doesn't do much. The general background of the yard didn't seem to pull them, but sudden sounds, sharp sounds, did. One of the chains in the yard, the loose one I mentioned, would hit a metal post when the wind picked up, and the infected would move toward it. Not fast, not in a coordinated way, just reorient, turn, drift in that direction, then stop when the sound stopped. I also noticed they clustered around particular spots, even without obvious sound sources. There was a spot near the east wall, on the other side of the yard from my trailer, where 3 or 4 infected would drift to and just mill around. I watched it for 2 days, trying to figure out what was pulling them there, and eventually I noticed that there was a PVC drainage pipe that came out of the yard's concrete wall at that location, about knee height, and that there was a neighborhood on the other side of that wall. When wind came from the east, the pipe was basically a sound channel, pulling in faint noise from the neighborhood. Activity, whatever was still moving over there. So that was the first piece. They hear through structures, through gaps in walls, through channels. The second piece came from the run on day 6. I went out at 4 a.m., early enough that the streets were as empty as they were going to get, cool enough that I could move fast without overheating in the clothes I was layered in. I went south along Meridian Street to a small grocery that I'd scouted from my rig on the way into the yard, about 1/3 of a mile from the scrapyard fence. The town was largely quiet. I saw maybe 24 infected on the route there and back. None of them noticed me because I moved slowly and didn't make sound. But what I noticed watching them was that the ones on the main street, the more trafficked one, were clustered thicker than the ones on the side streets. At first I thought that was just where more people had been, more activity in those locations, more infected that had been those people. But on the 3rd and 4th runs I tested the idea more deliberately, routing along different streets and counting, and the clustering on main corridors was too consistent to just be population distribution. There was more infected density on any street that had a regular sound source. Main streets had traffic, more vibration history in the pavement maybe, or more ambient noise still reaching them. Refrigeration units at businesses that were still running on battery backup, emergency lighting systems humming, anything on a circuit that was still drawing power somewhere. Sound. They follow sound backward to its likely source, and then they stay near the places where sound has been, like dogs returning to where they ate. Not intelligence. Just the dumbest possible version of pattern reinforcement. Whatever part of the brain runs the rest of them, the sound-seeking bit is still there. That's the only thing that's still there, as far as I can tell. The sound trick I mentioned in my log, using it on the approach to the distribution center, is based on this. I take a length of paracord with 2 soda cans tied to the end, filled with pebbles. I tie one end to a piece of rebar, toss it to land on a hard surface about 40 yards from where I want to approach, and pull the cord in slowly. As long as it's dragging on asphalt, the cans shake and rattle, and the infected in the area drift toward it. Simple, stupid, works every time. I'm proud of that one more than I probably should be. So, the ones near the depot gate that looked wrong. I didn't want to write it directly, because writing it makes it real, and I hadn't fully processed it yet. But it's been 2 days, and I still keep coming back to it. There were 2 infected near the gate. Standard looking, standard behavior, shambling, no real direction, drifting around within maybe a 30-foot radius of the gate itself. Drawn there probably by the same sound channel effect, some pipe or gap in the fence letting noise through. What was wrong was their eyes. I know that sounds like the setup to something, Like I'm about to say they turned and looked directly at me with calculating expressions. That's not what happened. The infected don't look at you with anything. Their eyes are open and they point vaguely in directions, but there's nothing organizing the looking. I've learned to read that over the past 4 months. I know what vacant looks like. These two didn't look vacant. They didn't look intelligent. I want to be clear about that, because I don't want to exaggerate this in a direction that isn't useful. They weren't making eye contact with me, weren't tracking me deliberately, weren't doing anything that suggested higher function. But they also weren't vacant the same way the others were. It was more like the expression had more tension in it. The muscles around the eyes and the brow and the mouth. The way a face looks when it's holding something, rather than just empty. I got my stuff, and I left, and I came back and I wrote, "Looked wrong" in my notebook, and I've been thinking about it ever since. There are things about these infected that I don't talk about even in my notes, because writing some things normalizes them, and I think the right response to certain things is to stay unsettled by them. But I'll say this, if there is any part of what used to be a person still in there, I don't know how to think about that. I don't know if I want to know. I closed the notebook. I put my headlamp on and moved to the workbench. The day I finished converting the trailer, I was in a field east of Joplin. I'd been keeping it there. Technically, it was a lot behind a landscaping company that had gone out of business 2 years prior, and I'd been paying $30 a month to the guy who owned the building next to it to park my trailer there without anyone asking questions. He thought I was an owner-operator storing freight. I never corrected him. It was the 3rd week of April. The news at that point was still officially describing it as isolated incidents and a developing public health situation, which is the kind of language that has a very specific shape, too careful to be nothing, too vague to be helpful. I'd been watching the incident reports from trucking forums and CB channels for almost a month by then, and the geography had been spreading westward, a smear of reported attacks coming out of the mid-Atlantic states and moving along the population corridors like water, following the slope of the ground. I spent that whole day doing the last installation on the rain collection system and running a final test on the solar array. I had 4 200-watt panels on the roof, wired in series parallel to a 48-volt battery bank that I'd assembled from salvaged forklift batteries. 8 individual cells, reconditioned, held in a steel rack I'd welded in the front corner, above the battery box. The system ran through a Victron charge controller that I'd spent more money on than felt comfortable at the time, and now feels like the best thing I ever bought. I had an inverter for running tools or anything that needed AC, and a 12-volt bus for all the DC loads. The LED lighting strips, the ventilation fans I'd installed in the roof, screened with hardware cloth and covered with louvers that closed flush when I wanted them shut. The water pump for the storage tank. Off the solar alone, in decent weather, I could run lights, ventilation, and the small water pump indefinitely. When the sun wasn't cooperating, I had a 3,000-watt propane generator in a baffled ventilated enclosure under the trailer frame, mounted on rubber isolators, muffled with a custom-made fiberglass box I'd built around it. At full load, it was about as loud as a gas furnace running. At the partial loads I usually ran it, quieter than that. I tested everything that day. Solar charging, working. Battery bank voltage, good. Lighting, working. Ventilation, working. Water pump, working. Door system, working. Rain collection valves, working. I stood inside my completed trailer in the late afternoon light and looked at what I'd built and felt something I almost couldn't name. It wasn't pride exactly. It was more like the feeling you get when you've done a calculation over and over, and the numbers always come out the same, and eventually you decide you trust the numbers. Something that sat in the stomach rather than the chest. Something settled. 3 days later, I drove to Killian Junction. I'd found the scrapyard on a Maps application about 2 months earlier when I was looking for a specific kind of place. My criteria were large enough that my trailer would blend in with existing trailers on site, far enough from any major population center that it wouldn't be on anyone's list of priority destinations, close enough to both a main road and secondary roads that I had multiple exit options, and with enough physical obscurity, fence height, building coverage, non-obvious access point, that a casual approach from any direction wouldn't immediately reveal whether the place was occupied or not. The Killian Junction yard was run by a company called Prentice Metal Recovery, which had apparently been doing a slow, grinding wind-down of operations for the better part of 5 years. The main office building at the south entrance had no vehicle in the lot when I drove past it on my first look, and the gate was held shut with a chain and a padlock, but the padlock wasn't locked, just threaded through the chain to look locked. The interior, visible through the fence, had the particular density of a place that had accumulated things over years and stopped deliberately organizing them some time ago. Old trailers, tanker sections, truck cabs in various states of parts harvesting, stacks of pipe and coiled cable, and the kind of miscellaneous industrial accumulation that you can only get from a decade of what we always called, well, we'll deal with that later. Exactly what I wanted. I cut the actual lock that had been on the gate and replaced it with my own. Then I replaced the original chain and lock look with a wire tie that I could undo from outside, but that looked closed from the road. I drove my rig in, found my spot. Third trailer slot from the south fence, in a row with 6 others that ranged from a beaten-up utility trailer to what looked like the back half of a refrigerated unit that had been in a fire, and backed mine in carefully. I cut the engine. I sat in the cab for about 5 minutes just listening. That afternoon I found the guard booth. The guard booth is a prefab structure, maybe 8 feet by 10, tucked into the northwest corner of the yard behind a wall of scrap I-beams and a corrugated steel wall that used to be the side of a portable storage unit. It is completely invisible from the main yard. You'd have to know it was there or wander past the I-beam wall by accident, and there's nothing past the I-beam wall that would draw you that direction because it's just fence and scrap and what looks like a dead end. The guard booth had a padlock on it, a real one, locked. I registered this and walked away and came back 2 days later to think about it. I'd assumed the yard was empty. The yard looked empty. There were no vehicles outside the booth or anywhere in the yard that showed recent use. The padlocked booth was either someone's stored property, keys with whoever owned Prentice Metal Recovery, whoever and wherever they were now, or it was someone's current space. I needed to know which, because if it was the second option, I needed to either deal with that or find a different yard. I spent 3 days observing. I moved my observation position twice, first from the right side slits in my trailer wall, then to a spot behind a stack of drum containers closer to the I-beam wall, where I had a narrow sight line to the booth door. I watched in the early morning, in the afternoon, and for a few hours after dark. On the third evening, just before full dark, the booth door opened. An old man came out. He was somewhere between 65 and 75. It was hard to tell, wearing the specific kind of layered clothing that said he'd been living in whatever he had on for more than 1 day. He stood outside the booth for about 30 seconds, looking at the yard in that particular way that people look at spaces they know very well. Not searching, just checking. His head moved in a pattern. South corner, west fence, east center, then up to the sky. He had a can in his hand. He drank from it. Then he went back inside and closed the door. I went back to my trailer and lay on my cot and stared at the ceiling for about an hour. The old man had been there before me. He was going to know I was there eventually. My trailer was in the yard, and he clearly did regular checks of it. If I went to him on my own terms, I could control the conversation. If I waited until he found me, I couldn't. I went to him the next morning. I knocked on the booth door. Not loud. 2 quiet knocks. Then I stepped back so I wasn't close to the door, and both my hands were visible. The door opened and he had a .38 revolver pointed at my face, and I was not surprised, but I still didn't enjoy it. "How long?" he said. Not a question, really. More like the first piece of information he needed. 4 days, I said. "Which trailer?" I told him. He looked at me for a long moment with the revolver still up, and then he lowered it. Not because he'd decided I was safe, I think, but because he'd decided that whatever happened next, pointing a gun at my face for the full duration of the conversation, wasn't efficient. His name was Dale Prentice, which answered the question of who owned the yard. He'd been living in the booth since the second week of the outbreak. He'd been the night watchman, more or less by default. He was the owner. There were no other employees left, And he'd been sleeping in the booth anyway, on the nights when he stayed late, because the drive home was 40 minutes, and some nights he just didn't feel like it. The outbreak reached his county on a Thursday. By Saturday, the town had enough violence and chaos that going home stopped being an option he was exercising. He stayed in the booth. He had a small camping stove, a sleeping bag, some canned food he'd bought from a case he kept in the booth because, as he put it, "I've been 57 years old in this country, and I know what eventually happens." He was not warm exactly, but he was direct, which I respect more. He asked me 4 questions. What did I want? What did I have? What was I going to do when the food ran out? And whether I was going to bring anyone else here. I answered them in order. Stay and survive. A stocked trailer with solar and water collection. Go out and get more carefully. And no. He thought about this for a while. Then he said he didn't care what I did, as long as I didn't use sound, didn't use light outside at night, and didn't touch the northeast corner of the yard, where he'd buried 2 of his employees who'd come back to the yard sick in the first week, and then died, one at a time, in the booth with him. I said I understood. He said, "There's a pipe on the east wall that feeds sound from the neighborhood. You figure that out yourself?" I said I had. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. He went back inside his booth and closed the door. That was our first conversation. It took maybe 4 minutes. I've had maybe 15 conversations with Dale total over the past 4 months. Not because we avoid each other. We don't, particularly. But because we're both the kind of people who don't talk unless there's a reason to talk. And most days there isn't a reason. We've worked out a basic system. A chalk mark on the fence post near my trailer means everything's normal, his systems are working. An X through the mark means something's changed and we need to check in. I've put an X on the post 3 times. He's put 1 on twice. He knows about the sound trick with the cans. He's been using a version of it before I got here. He had a wind chime hung on the east wall near the drainage pipe, which served as a decoy in that direction. Smart, in a different way from my approach. Mine's active, his is passive. We talked about the difference once, and he said the active approach was the right one for a moving person, but that he wasn't a moving person, and the passive approach was right for a fixed position. He's right about that. He's right about most practical things, which is somewhat annoying, because I've spent 20 years priding myself on being the guy who's right about practical things. He's wrong about one thing. He thinks nobody's going to come here looking. He thinks the yard is invisible, because it's always been invisible. I've tried to explain that the invisibility of a place works on 2 different timescales. It's invisible before something changes, and then the thing that changes can make everything visible at once. He listens when I say this, but I don't think he really believes it. He's been safe here for 4 months, and safety starts to feel like a state of nature after a while. It stops feeling like a condition you're maintaining, which is why I was the one who noticed the tire tracks. I need to describe the scrapyard layout more precisely because it matters. The yard is roughly rectangular, about 300 feet east-west, and 200 feet north-south. The main entrance is on the south side, a double gate, chain link, mounted between 2 steel posts that have the Prentice metal recovery sign bolted to them. The sign is still there. The gate is still doing its convincing closed impression. The fence on all 4 sides is 8-foot chain link, with 3 strands of barbed wire on top, and it's intact, except for one section on the northwest side, where a section of fence post has leaned over enough that a person could duck under the bottom rail if they were motivated. I know about the northwest gap. I made it, actually, or made it worse, more precisely. It was already slightly bowed from something hitting it years ago. I have a buried anchor point 10 feet inside the fence at that location, and a section of chain that connects to the fence rail from the inside. I can pull the rail down from inside and create a human-sized gap in about 15 seconds. It's my back door. Inside the fence, my trailer row on the south side, which has 7 trailers including mine. Dale's booth in the northwest corner. In the center of the yard, a large concrete pad where heavy equipment used to be parked. A crane and 2 loader tractors that are now just rusting in place. On the east side, a low building that used to be a small repair shop. 1 bay, pull-through, roller door on both ends. both doors currently rusted about halfway up, and not going further in either direction. On the north side, the biggest accumulation of scrap, pipe stacks, drum containers, I-beams, structural steel, coiled cable, the whole archaeological layering of 20 years of acquiring and not disposing. The tire tracks were on the east side of the yard, roughly parallel to the east fence. They were in the dirt that runs between the fence and the concrete pad, and they were fresh. I only noticed them because I'd gone to the repair shop to get a specific socket wrench I'd left there, and I'd walked the fence line on the way back for no good reason, except I do that sometimes when I need to think. Fresh tire tracks. Narrow tread, like a small pickup or an SUV. Coming from the north end of the east fence and running south to where the repair shop bay door was, and then stopping. Stopping. And then there were footprints in the loose dirt near the door. Someone had stopped here, recently, maybe in the last 48 hours, and walked to the door of the repair shop. I spent about 20 minutes in the repair shop, looking for evidence of what they'd done when they got to the door, whether they'd gotten inside. The roller door on the east end was rusted at the bottom edge, but I could see faint scratch marks in the dirt where someone had tried to pull it. Hadn't gotten it open. Moved on. I walked back to Dale's booth and knocked. "I know," he said, when I told him about the tracks. "When?" I said. "2 nights ago, I heard the vehicle. I watched from inside. 2 people. Young, I think." He paused. "They didn't get in. They didn't try the main gate. They followed the fence line and tried the building and left." "Did they look at the trailers?" He was quiet for a moment. "They looked at the whole yard from outside the fence. They had a light, scanned it." He looked at me. "Stayed on your row for a moment." I didn't say anything right away. "Could be random," he said. "Could be," I said. "But if they're scouting, they'll be back. And next time they'll try the gate." He didn't argue. That was 8 days ago. The thing I need to tell you about the trailer that I haven't told you yet is the decoy aspect. Because that was something I'd planned from the beginning, not something I improvised when the scouts showed up. I've got 3 other trailers in the yard, not mine, the existing ones, that I've spent time on over the past few months, not modifying them structurally, just making them look different from the outside in specific, deliberate ways. The first one, which is the trailer immediately to the right of mine when you're looking at the row from the yard, I've made look occupied but abandoned. I dragged an old workbench and some scattered tools to the rear of it when both doors were open, and then closed the doors, leaving one slightly ajar. I put a chain on the handle that's looped but not locked. From the outside it looks like someone started using this space and then left in a hurry. The second one, 3 slots down from mine, I've made look completely empty and inaccessible. I welded the door handles closed, which took most of an afternoon and was extremely annoying. Then I put a very convincing cheap lock on it that is also welded in place. The lock won't open because it's not actually connected to anything, and the doors won't move because the handles are welded. Someone testing that will think the trailer is full of something and sealed. The third one is the interesting one, 2 trailers down from mine on the left, and I have to tell you about what I found in that one before I finish the decoy work, because what I found stopped me cold for about 20 minutes. I'd opened it in week 3. Just checking. I wanted to know what all the trailers in the yard contained, partly for supply reasons and partly because I hated not knowing what was 6 feet away from where I slept. Most of them were empty or contained the kind of inert industrial junk that has no survival value. Old belts, worn-out bearing housings, a pile of rusted bolt stock. One had a case of motor oil and a box of shop rags that I took immediately. The one 2 doors down from mine, I opened and found it already set up as a living space. Not currently occupied, but recently, there was a sleeping bag on a piece of foam on the floor, a 5-gallon water jug that was empty, a box of crackers that had been opened and half-eaten, a small battery-powered lantern that was dead, and a folded piece of paper. I took the paper. I unfolded it. It was a hand-drawn map of the scrapyard. Fairly accurate. The person had clearly spent time observing the layout. The main gate, the trailer row, the repair shop, the north scrap pile. There were X marks on 2 locations, the repair shop and the northwest corner, which is where Dale's booth is. Whoever had been here before me or possibly around the same time as me, had been mapping the same things I would have mapped. There was no date on anything. There was no name. There was no indication of where the person had gone. I took the map. I put the sleeping bag and the foam and the lantern back where I'd found them, and I closed the trailer. I haven't told Dale about any of this, partly because I haven't decided what it means, and partly because Dale is already not sleeping well, and the idea that someone else was in his yard is the kind of information that would change how he operates in ways that might be counterproductive. The map is folded in my notebook. Back to now. Day 114. I'm at the workbench in the middle zone with the headlamp going, looking at a section of 1-inch steel pipe that I've been meaning to turn into something. Doesn't matter what I'm making. Making something with my hands while my brain runs is a thing I've been doing since I was about 12 years old, and it still works the same. I'm thinking about the rail yard. There's a rail freight yard off County Road 12, about 4 miles from the scrapyard. I found it on my third major scavenging run, when I went out farther than I had before, still learning the territory. It's a medium-sized yard, not one of the major intermodal hubs, more of a switching station with some associated freight storage. There are 4 warehouse structures on the property, and what looks like a general merchandise warehouse that served some kind of regional distribution function. I've been looking at it from a distance twice. I haven't gone in yet. My hesitation comes from 2 things. First, rail yards are magnets. Even before the outbreak, freight rail facilities were places where transient populations passed through. Workers, contractors, sometimes people who weren't supposed to be there at all. In the aftermath, a facility with potential food stores is the kind of place that attracts desperate people. I've been watching the approaches to the rail yard from the road on my scavenging routes, and I've seen one indication that others have been there. A broken lock on the warehouse gate on my second pass, where the first pass had shown it intact. Second thing, 4 miles is at the edge of my comfortable range for a round trip on foot carrying weight. I've got a bicycle, found it in a house on the second week, a basic mountain bike in decent shape that I stash in the repair shop. But a bicycle makes sound, and makes me faster and faster. Sometimes means you go past things before you can react to them. I need to think about the right approach. What I'm going to do, I decide at some point in the next hour while I work on the pipe, is go out tomorrow morning and do a close observation of the rail yard before committing to entry. 4 hours of watching will tell me more than anything I can deduce from across the road. I work until about 6 a.m., and then I get some sleep. Day 115. I'm up at 5:30 and out of the trailer before the light gets established. The yard is quiet in the specific early morning way that's become comfortable to me. The chain tapping, the structure settling, the distant sound of nothing in particular. The infected that were in the east end last night are gone. They drifted back out through some gap in the fence that I haven't found yet. Or they're still in there, tucked up against the east wall, where I can't see them. I do a quick visual check from the high point of the repair shop roof, where I've got a clear sight line over most of the yard. I can see 3 of the roads that approach the scrapyard, and none of them have anything moving. I go out through the northwest gap. I pull the fence rail down, slip through, reset it. The chain anchor keeps it from looking disturbed from the outside. The territory between the scrapyard and County Road 12 is mixed. Residential on the east side, light commercial and open field on the west. I go west, along the edge of a field that used to be soybeans and is now just a dried tangle of old stalks. Less cover than going through the residential zone, but also fewer infected. The residential areas have more of them, because residential areas had more people, which is simple math. I keep a pace that's close to walking, but covers ground without wasted movement. I've gotten good at the specific gait that doesn't produce sound. Arms low, foot placement on the outer edge first, and then rolling in, avoiding the heel strike that sends a tap through concrete. I know which streets are concrete and which are asphalt. Asphalt is quieter. I reach the rail yard access road at just past 6 a.m. From the outside, through the chain-link perimeter fence, the yard looks undisturbed except for that broken gate lock. I watch it for 30 minutes from the cover of some overgrown brush on the south side of the access road. 3 infected visible, 1 near the first warehouse, 2 near the switching house. No humans visible. No recent vehicle tracks on the access road beyond what was already there on my last look. I don't go in yet. I move to the east side and watch for another 40 minutes from a different angle. Nothing changes. The infected near the warehouse shambles in a slow circle that brings it back to approximately the same starting point every 8 or 9 minutes. The two near the switching house aren't moving at all, which is fine. They're not facing my direction, and they're not near the entry point I'd use. I decide to go in. I use the sound trick at the northeast corner. I toss my rattle rig toward the far end of the yard, toward the switching house, and wait. The two infected there turn toward it. The one near the warehouse turns halfway. I go through the gate. Inside the yard, 5 rail cars on a storage siding, all closed. One with a broken door hinge that's swinging slightly. 4 warehouse structures. A small trailer lot on the south side that has 6 unmarked trailers, none of which I've checked before. I go to the nearest warehouse first. The side door is unlocked. The main rolling door has a broken motor, so the side door is the working entrance, and it's been propped open with a piece of fire hose that someone left there. Either the place has been accessed before, or it was left like this from before the outbreak. Inside, a warehouse that smells like cardboard and old plastic. High ceiling, natural light coming through skylights, 3 of which are broken and are now letting in both light and some settled damp. The floor is concrete, dusty, and I can see clearly in the light from the skylights that the dust shows shoe prints, several sets, running roughly east-west across the floor toward the back. Someone has been in here, more than once probably. The prints aren't all from the same shoe size, and there are overlapping layers. I do what I always do when I find a disturbed space. I stop. I stand still for 2 minutes. I listen to the warehouse settle and breathe and tell me things. What it tells me is that nobody is in here right now. The shoe prints are weeks old at minimum. The dust layer over them is consistent. The warehouse has that particular quality of emptiness that's about air pressure and acoustic delay, rather than just silence. Empty spaces with people in them sound different from genuinely empty spaces. It's something I noticed in my first month, and I trust it now, the same way I trust the load balance feeling through a steering wheel. I move through the first warehouse carefully. In the far section, behind a rack system that's partially fallen, I find what I was hoping for. A significant section of packaged food goods. Not refrigerated. This would have been ambient temperature distribution. Canned and packaged goods, mostly. Organized in cases on pallet boards that the fallen rack has partially scattered. Canned tomato sauce. Canned fruit. Boxed pasta in various sizes. Some condiment packets in a torn case. Individual hot sauce and mustard and mayonnaise packets. The kind you get at fast food restaurants. A full pallet of rice in 2-pound vacuum bags that appears entirely intact, covered with a dust sheet that's kept most of the moisture off. This is good. This is very good. I don't take anything today. I take photographs with the small camera I carry, a simple point and shoot that's been in my kit since day 2, because visual records of scavenge locations are something I started doing on my 3rd run when I came back and couldn't remember clearly whether a location I'd half-scoped had a back entrance or not. I photograph the layout, the supply quantities, the access points. Then I leave the way I came. I watch the switching house infected from 50 feet. They've drifted back toward their original positions. I go to the second warehouse. Day 115, continued. The second warehouse is larger. It's also partially collapsed on the northwest corner. The roof structure has given way and brought down some of the wall framing with it, which has opened up a roughly triangular hole in that corner that's about 6 feet tall at the apex. I can see into the warehouse through the hole before I go in, which is useful. What I see inside through the hole is darkness in the middle sections, some light at the far end from a row of high windows, and a shapes that resolve into a vehicle when my eyes adjust. A truck, not a semi, a medium-duty box truck, maybe a 24-footer, white, no markings, parked inside the warehouse. This changes my calculus. If the truck was driven in here, someone drove it. If someone drove it here, they either left and didn't come back or they're still here somewhere. I spend 5 minutes observing through the hole. The truck doesn't move. There's no light inside the warehouse. Nobody's running anything powered. There are no sounds of human activity. The infected I've seen in the yard have not clustered near this building in particular, which is some indication that there's no ongoing activity here generating sound or smell. I go in through the collapsed corner. The truck is unlocked. Keys not in it. Rear cargo door is down and locked with a padlock. The padlock is a serious one. Master lock commercial grade. The kind with a hardened shackle. Not something I'm going to cut quickly or quietly. I check the cab again. No keys. Check the sun visor. Under the seat. Nothing. In the glove compartment, a folded piece of paper. It's not a map this time. It's a list. Handwritten. Pencil. Fairly neat handwriting. The list reads, Warehouse 2. Supplies secured Warehouse 3. Cleared and empty. Check again for medical. North siding. 3 cars sealed. Gate padlock replaced. April 29th. Fuel. 40 gallons in cans. Warehouse 1 back room. Behind the rack. Then a blank line. Then, checkpoint. L7 radio. Channel 14,0600 and 1800. Don't be late. I read the list 3 times. I fold it exactly the way it was folded, and I put it back in the glove compartment. I stand in the warehouse for about 30 seconds not moving. Then I go and check the back room of Warehouse 1 for the fuel. I find it exactly where the list said, 8 5-gallon fuel cans, stacked behind the fallen rack, 4 of which are full, and 4 of which are approximately half full. About 60 gallons total, not 40. Which means either the list was wrong, or someone's come and taken some since the list was written. I leave the fuel. I leave the warehouse. I go back to the scrapyard, and I sit in my trailer for a long time. L7 radio, channel 14, 0600 and 1800. This is organized. This isn't 2 scouts who happen to drive past. This is a group with assigned radio check-ins and a location they're using as a supply cache. The truck in the warehouse is either theirs or they're aware of it. They've been in this rail yard. They know about the food stores I just photographed. And they've been within 4 miles of my scrapyard. I open my notebook and start a new page. This is the part of a survival situation that nobody plans for correctly, I think. Not the hungry days, not the close calls with infected, not even the loneliness, which is its own thing. The part nobody plans for is when other organized people show up in your territory and you have to figure out what they are before they figure out what you are. Because they're either valuable or dangerous, and the problem is that the answer to that question isn't visible from the outside. Groups that look organized can be organized around terrible things. I've seen what the road looks like when I've passed through areas in the first month. The burned buildings, the cleared-out pharmacy with the door that had been welded shut from the outside with something screaming on the inside, which is a thing I'm going to live with forever. That was a group of organized people making organized decisions. But also, I know I can't do this indefinitely alone. Not because I'm not managing. I am managing, clearly. It's day 115 and I'm alive and supplied and structurally sound. But because management isn't a permanent state. Circumstances change, and circumstances that require 2 people are coming eventually, and I cannot stop them by myself. Dale is not 2 people. Dale is 80% of a person, valuable and competent, and completely unwilling to leave his booth. He's my early warning system, and my second set of eyes, and occasionally my sounding board, but he's not backup in an operational sense. I need to think about the L7 group carefully. Day 118. I went back to the rail yard 2 more times. On day 116, I did another observation pass, this time positioning myself near the switching house early enough to watch the 6 a.m. check-in window without being close enough to hear the radio. I couldn't tell from watching the yard whether anyone actually came in for the check-in. The truck was still in Warehouse 2, no vehicle activity on the access road. On day 117, I did something riskier. I went into the yard in the early evening, before the 6 p.m. check-in window, and I positioned myself in the shadows behind the rack in Warehouse 1 and waited. At 6:02 p.m. exactly, a radio crackled somewhere in the building. I couldn't hear the transmission clearly. I was maybe 50 feet away through a wall, and whatever was radioing was on the other side of that wall. But I heard the response, which came from somewhere inside Warehouse 1 itself, very close to me. Someone was in the building who I hadn't detected. The response was a voice, male, somewhere between 30 and 50 by sound, saying, 7 here. Yard is clear. Supplies secure. No activity. A pause. Then, southeast area is still the concern. You want a physical check? Another pause. The external radio responding. I couldn't make out the response. Copy that. I'll extend the perimeter tomorrow. Another pause. Out. Then silence. I was in the building with someone, and I needed to leave without them knowing I'd been there. I stayed behind the rack for 40 minutes, breathing through my mouth, not moving. I could hear very faint sounds that I traced to approximately the corner where the office space would have been if this were a typical warehouse layout. The sounds of someone moving minimally, not performing any tasks, just existing in a small space. A person doing what people do when they're holding position and waiting for time to pass. At around 6:50, I decided to move. The choice was, wait until they slept, which might be hours, or use the noise trick to cover my exit. The noise trick required making sound, which I didn't want to do inside the building with someone already in here. So I waited. At 7:15, the sounds stopped completely. Not like they'd left, like they'd settled. I moved at 7:30, slowly. 14 steps to the side door. I had the door opening memorized. I'd oiled the hinges 2 days prior on my first visit, quietly, specifically because I'd thought I might need to use it quietly later. It opened without sound. I was outside. I was in the yard in the falling dark, with 2 infected drifting somewhere I couldn't immediately see. I stood still and let my eyes adjust. I found the infected. 1 north, 1 east, neither oriented toward me. I moved south to the gate, slow, deliberate, no noise. Out through the gate, into the field, gone. I walked back to the scrapyard with a lot to think about. 7. That was a designation. The person in the warehouse was Unit 7, or Person 7 in some counting system, which meant there were at least 7 people in this group, maybe more. Organized enough to have a numbering system. Organized enough to maintain a radio check-in schedule and assigned observation positions. The southeast area as a concern. Southeast of the rail yard is where my scrapyard is. Could be coincidence. Could be that they've seen something. The scrapyard itself, activity near it, my tire track when I drove in the first time, anything. Or it could mean something else entirely. I talked to Dale that night. I told him most of it. He listened the way he always listens, which is the way a very old nail holds. Not visibly moving, but not going anywhere either. What are they looking for? He said. Supplies, probably. Could be establishing a network. Could be just expansion. How many? 7 minimum. Could be much more. This might be an outpost. Dale was quiet for a bit. Then he said, I found something this morning. He showed me. He'd gone to check the northwest corner of the yard, near his booth, and found a small piece of surveyor's flagging tape tied to the fence. Orange. New. He hadn't seen it before yesterday, and he didn't tie it there. Someone had flagged the northwest fence. From outside. Not the main entrance. The northwest corner, which is where my hidden gap is, my back door. I don't know if they found the gap specifically, or if they just flagged the area. The flagging tape was tied about 6 feet south of the gap, which could mean they weren't in the exact right spot, or it could mean they flagged it as the general area of interest. I sat with that information for a while. Then I went to bed. I dreamed about Donna, which I never do. She was telling me something in the dream that I couldn't hear because there was road noise, the specific diesel and wind sound of driving at speed, and she was talking over it, and I was watching her mouth move and not getting it. I woke up at 3 a.m. and lay there until 5. Day 119. I start on the decoy plan in earnest. Here's what I know. Someone is watching the scrapyard from outside. They've flagged the northwest fence. They may or may not know about the back gap. They almost certainly know there are trailers here. You can see the trailer row from the road on the south side, and they may have determined from their earlier pass that the trailers could be worth a closer look. What I want them to find, if they come in, evidence that the yard was scavenged before their arrival, supplies already stripped, no ongoing habitation. What I need them to not find: the trailer, Dale's booth, the map of the yard as a resource. The strategy is 3 parts. Part 1. Making the yard look picked over. I need to scatter detritus that reads as evidence of prior scavenging. Opened food containers, discarded packaging, things that look like someone went through here weeks ago and took what was useful. I spend the morning doing this carefully. Not obvious theater. Subtle archaeology of absence. A can opener left near the repair shop. Some flattened cardboard boxes that could be packaging from removed supplies. Drag marks in the dirt near the trailer row that look like equipment was moved out. I've gotten good at reading disturbed environments, so I think about what a disturbed environment looks like from someone who's also good at reading them. Subtle, weeks old, no recent foot traffic. Part 2. The standout trailer, the one immediately to the right of mine, which I'd already staged as occupied and abandoned. I refine this. I leave the door properly ajar. I scatter some items near it that suggest a person camped here and left. But I also leave something specific. A handwritten note on a piece of cardboard that says, in a deliberately messy script that doesn't look like mine, "Group moved north. Supplies taken. Don't bother." It's a layer of misdirection. If someone comes in looking, finds this trailer, finds the note, it's plausible that someone was here and left. Part 3. The gap. This is the hardest one. My back door is valuable, and I don't want it found. I decide to close it up for now. I use some scrap wire to tie the fence rail at a more natural-looking angle, removing the obvious intentionality of the gap. My exit point moves to a different section of fence. I identify a spot on the south fence, near the left end of the trailer row, where the fence post has corroded enough at the base that with some directed pressure, I can lean the whole section outward about 2 feet, enough for a person to slide through. I mark the post with a small notch at knee height, so I can find it by feel in the dark. This takes all day. By evening, I've done most of it. I'm tired in the specific way you get tired from mental work disguised as physical work. The decisions have been the exhausting part. I check in with Dale at dusk. He's noted something. The flagging tape is gone. Someone removed it, or it fell. He can't tell which. They may have come back in the daylight, I said. Or the wind got it. It wasn't tied tightly. Either way, I said, assume they're coming in soon. He nodded once. He said, "My booth is my booth. I know. If they find it, I'll deal with it myself." I didn't argue. I understood what he was saying, and I understood that he meant it. Day 121. They came on day 121. I heard them at around 10 a.m. Not the vehicle. I didn't hear that. What I heard was the gate. The sound of a chain being cut is a specific sharp sound, one clean ring, and then the chain moves. I knew that sound immediately because I'd made it myself. I was at my observation slit inside the trailer, within maybe 15 seconds of the sound. 3 people came through the gate on foot. They'd left their vehicle outside, or they were on foot from somewhere nearby. I couldn't see past the gate from my slit. 2 men and a woman, all wearing the same style of clothing. Not a uniform exactly, but a consistent color scheme, tan and dark green, which said they'd been dressed intentionally for this environment. They all had packs. 2 of them had visible firearms on their belts, though not held. The third, the woman, was carrying something in her hand that after a moment I identified as a tablet computer in a rubberized case. She was looking at it and then looking up at the yard. They spread out. Slow, methodical sweep. They were good, not tense, not rushed, moving with the deliberate pace of people who've done this before. The woman with the tablet moved to the center of the yard. The 2 men fanned out, one going toward the repair shop, one going toward the north scrap pile. The man going toward the repair shop was going to pass close to my trailer row. I watched him approach. He stopped at the first trailer in the row, the one that wasn't mine but was at the far end. He tried the handle, got nothing, moved on, tried the second, third. He reached the stage trailer, the one with the ajar door and the note, and pushed the door open. I couldn't see his face, but I could see his posture change. He read something inside. He stepped back. He turned and called something to the woman with the tablet. She came over. I could hear their voices, but not the words. She photographed the inside of the trailer with the tablet. They talked for a moment. The man with the tablet made a gesture that was dismissive. Not urgently dismissive, just categorizing. Moving on. He continued down the row. He stopped in front of my trailer. This is the moment you prepare for, and still feel wrong when it arrives. He was standing about 12 feet from where I was sitting, separated by 2 inches of steel and 6 inches of insulation, and some very deliberate work. I did not move. I was in my red light setup with the headlamp off now. I'd killed it the moment I heard the gate, and I was sitting on the cot with my back against the front wall, which put me as far from the doors as the trailer allowed. He tried the exterior handle. I heard the mechanism move, the rods rotating, the correct action, and then not disengage, because there was nothing connected to those rods on the inside. The handle moved. The door didn't. He tried it again, tested it. Then he tried what I'd have tried in his position. He pushed one door, then the other. Checked the gap between them. The doors had about a 3mm gap between them that was compressed by the rubber weather strip and showed no light and no give. He moved on to the next trailer in the row. I let out a breath, slowly and carefully through my nose, and didn't move for about 5 minutes. The search lasted about 40 minutes total. They went through the repair shop. I could hear them in there, their voices somewhat audible through the tin walls. They went through the north scrap pile area. They checked the trailers on the far end of the row. They didn't find Dale's booth. I'm not sure whether they looked at the northwest corner at all. If they did, the I-beam wall and the corrugated panel that fronts the booth access point did their job. At around 10:45, they gathered in the center of the yard near the concrete pad. The woman was talking, and the 2 men were listening. I couldn't hear the conversation from inside my trailer. She pulled something from her pack, a piece of paper or a notebook, and showed it to them, and one of the men wrote something. Then they left through the gate. I waited 20 minutes before I moved. Dale was in his booth. I knocked with our pattern, 2 taps, pause, 1 tap, and he opened immediately, which meant he'd been standing at the door. His face had the expression of someone who's been holding a very specific posture for a long time and has just released it. They were thorough, he said. You saw. I have a gap in the back panel. I can see a wide strip of the central yard. He looked at me. The woman with the tablet. She photographed everything. For documentation or for mapping? Both, I think. He paused. There was something else. One of the men, the shorter one. He went around the east side, along the fence, not looking at the building contents, looking at the fence itself. I thought about this. Looking at the fence, checking for gaps, or checking their orange tape mark from the outside and trying to match it to an interior location. He found the old gap, Dale said. How do you know? He stopped in that spot for longer than anywhere else. He crouched down, then he moved on. So they knew about the gap. Whether they knew it was intentional or just a structural weakness in the fence, I didn't know. I said, they'll be back. I know. What do you want to do? He looked at me steadily. I'm going to stay in my booth. Dale. I am going to stay in my booth, he said again. Not defensive. Just stating a fact the way you state a fact about gravity. I have 2 dead men in my northeast corner, and I have lived in this yard for 60 years, on and off, and I will die in this yard. Not from the infected, and not from people who think they can come in here with a tablet computer and tell me what's mine. He paused. But I'll take your advice on the practical things. That was the longest speech I'd heard from him. I thought about what to say. I said, let me work on the northwest corner tonight. Make the gap less obvious. And we should change the gate chain. He agreed to both. I worked on the fence that evening, after dark. I used wire ties and a piece of scrap angle iron to brace the rail more convincingly. The gap was now genuinely harder to find. It still existed. I kept it. But you'd have to know it was there rather than stumble onto it. That night I sat at my fold-out table with a piece of paper and tried to think clearly about what I knew. The group that searched the yard was organized, disciplined, and documentation-oriented. They photographed things. They wrote things down. They were specifically checking the fence. which meant they were looking for access points or monitoring a perimeter. The radio communication I'd heard used designations 7, which meant a unit structure of some kind. This felt like the infrastructure of something larger, not just a survivor group scraping by. Something with more structure than that, which meant either safety or danger at a different order of magnitude than what I'd been thinking about. Day 124. 3 days of normal. No one comes back to the yard. I do a water collection run on day 122. I've got access to the roof of the repair shop, and the rain that came through the roof gaps has pooled on the floor in one corner, which I can filter and collect. Not much, but enough to stretch my tank. On day 123, I go to the rail yard for a proper supply run with my cart. A folding utility cart I found in a hardware store with pneumatic tires that roll quietly, and I pull back 2 runs of canned goods and rice before I call it. The food supply feels better now. On day 124, at around 2 p.m., the box truck from Warehouse 2 at the rail yard drives past my scrapyard on County Road 7. I'm at my observation slit when it passes. Same truck, same white, same unmarked box body. It slows as it passes the scrapyard. Not enough to stop, not enough to be obvious, but a definite reduction in speed. Then it continues north on County Road 7. A half hour later it comes back south. Same slight slowing in front of the yard. Then gone. They're surveilling. I knock on Dale's booth. He's already at the door. I saw it, he said. The thing about the woman with the tablet and the box truck surveilling the yard is that they force a decision I've been deferring. In my original plan, which I assembled before any of this, when the plan was just me and the trailer and staying invisible, there was no component for what to do about an organized group with resources and a systematic approach. I'd planned for individuals, for small groups of desperate people, for infected, not for this. My options as I lay them out are: Option 1. Continue the current strategy. Keep the yard looking picked over. Don't react. Hope they survey and move on. This is passive and depends on their interest in the yard declining, which I can't control. Option 2. Make contact. Go to the rail yard. Find a way to communicate with whoever is in charge. Try to establish something. The risk is that their agenda isn't compatible with mine, that they want to consolidate resources under their control rather than coexist, and that making contact reveals what I have. Option 3. Create a bigger distraction, something that pulls their attention away from the scrapyard entirely. Give them a more interesting target. This is the most active option, and the most complex. I've been thinking about option 3 for 2 days, and it's where my mind keeps landing, partly because it feels most like what I'd do on a freight logistics problem. When you can't take a route, you don't just stop. You find a different route. And when you want to stop someone from looking at something, you give them something better to look at. About 6 miles north of the scrapyard, there's a large commercial complex, a lumber yard attached to a home improvement store, which before the outbreak would have been exactly the kind of substantial resource that an organized group would want. I've been past it 4 times. It's intact, the building is solid. I've looked at the exterior enough to know there's likely food in the garden center, construction materials and tools, and a fuel depot for their vehicles out back. I've never gone in because it's 6 miles from my trailer. But if I can let the organized group know it's there, they'll have a much more interesting place to focus than a scrapyard that looks already picked over. The question is how to let them know without looking like I'm directing them, and without them knowing the tip came from someone local. I work on this problem for 3 days. On day 127, I write a note. The note is on a piece of paper from a notepad I haven't used for anything else, written in a different handwriting than my own. I write left-handed even though I'm right-handed, which makes it look genuinely different. The note says, Reeves Home and Lumber, Route 7 North, 6 miles. Intact as of 3 weeks ago. Fuel depot at back. Haven't been back since the first look, but worth a serious run. Simple. Practical. The kind of information one survivor shares with another. I leave the note in the stage trailer, the one with the ajar door and the abandoned camp setup. I push it back so it's partly under the sleeping pad I'd left there. Findable, but not obvious. Something you'd find on a thorough second look. Then I go back to my trailer and wait. Day 130. They came back on day 129. I heard them at around 9 a.m. 2 people this time, not 3. Different vehicle, or I didn't hear it. They may have parked farther away and walked. I watched through the slit. 2 men, neither the same 2 from the first visit. They went directly to the stage trailer. They were in there for maybe 8 minutes. They left the yard in under 30 minutes total. On day 130, from my observation slit, I watched the box truck go north on County Road 7 at 7 a.m. I watch it come back south at 11:30 a.m. It doesn't slow down in front of my yard. I write good in my notebook. This is the part of the story where I tell you about the other person in the trailer, because I've been putting it off, and I've been putting it off for a reason that has to do with not wanting to think too carefully about what it means. On day 135, 10 days after I planted the note about the lumber yard, I'm doing a routine check of the yard perimeter, walking the fence interior, looking for any new evidence of external entry. I do this every 3 to 4 days. I go around clockwise. South fence, east fence, north scrap pile, northwest corner, back to the trailer row. When I reach the trailer 2 slots down from mine, the one I'd found with the sleeping bag and the map, I notice the door is not exactly as I left it. I had closed it to the latch but not locked it, and I'd left a small piece of gravel balanced on the door frame about 6 inches in. A simple tell, the kind of thing that takes about 2 seconds to set and falls immediately if the door opens. The piece of gravel is gone. Someone opened this trailer. I step back from the door and stand quietly for a moment. Then I approach the door from the hinge side, putting me on the same side as the opening sweep, so if someone inside tries to rush out, the door swings away from me rather than into me, and I knock. Not our 2-in-1 pattern, just 3 knocks, normal, the way a neighbor knocks on a door. Nothing. I wait 30 seconds. I knock again. A voice from inside, female, not panicked but cautious. Who's there? I live here, I said. Have for about 4 months. I found your map. A very long pause. Then, are you alone? Right now, yes. There's also an old man on the other side of the yard who doesn't leave his booth. That's it. Another pause. Then, how long have you known I was here? This was a reasonable question and I gave it a fair answer. I found evidence of your setup on around day 20. I didn't know you were currently in the trailer until this morning. The door tell fell. The door opened about 8 inches. Half a face appeared in the gap. A woman, maybe early 30s, with the specific complexion of someone who hasn't been in direct sunlight for a while. Brown hair pulled back, dark circles, eyes that did the rapid, practiced scan that anyone who's been surviving for a while develops. She looked at me for a moment, then she said, "Do you want some coffee?" I almost laughed. I said yes. Her name was Patty, Patricia Alden, but she'd been Patty her whole life and wasn't planning to change that just because the world ended. She'd been in the trailer, off and on, since approximately day 30. Off and on because she wasn't there continuously. She had another location, she said, a house she stayed at on the south end of town that she used as a secondary base. She came to the scrapyard when she needed to be less visible. I asked why she needed to be less visible. She said, "Because I'm watching the same group you're watching." And that opened the real conversation. Patty had been a nurse at a regional hospital about 20 miles north. She'd gotten out of the hospital on day 6, when the infected count inside the facility went from manageable to not, and she'd been moving around the county since then. She'd found the scrapyard early. She had a truck. She drove the back roads. She'd looked at the yard the same way I had, and made some of the same assessments. She'd been using it as a semi-permanent camp point before I arrived. She knew about the L7 group. She called them that, L7, which she'd seen on a tag on the radio equipment in the rail yard when she'd done her own check of the facility. She'd been watching them for about 3 weeks before I started watching them. What she'd gathered was more than I had, because she was more mobile than I was, and willing to follow them at greater distance. "They're not a random survivor group," she said. We were sitting in her trailer, which was considerably less set up than mine. Sleeping bag, water jugs, her pack, some food. The hand-drawn map was still there, now with additions I hadn't seen. "They have a supply chain. They're moving food from storage locations to a central point, and the central point isn't around here. How far? I said. I've followed their truck twice, north on Route 7, then east on State 14, then into the hills along County 12. There's a facility out there. I haven't gotten close enough to see it clearly. Big enough to have multiple vehicles in the lot. Generator noise at night. I thought about this. A large, powered facility, multiple vehicles, organized personnel doing systematic supply runs. Are they hostile? I said. To me, I don't know. I've avoided contact. She paused. But I've heard radio traffic that I shouldn't have been able to hear. They use Channel 14 for their check-ins, but they have other channels. I picked up a burst on Channel 9 twice. She looked at me. They talk about clearing locations, not just taking supplies. Clearing. Clearing, as in removing anything that indicates habitation, removing people from spaces they want, or removing people from spaces, period. You don't know which, I said. No, she said. I don't know which. We sat for a moment with that. What are you planning to do? I asked. She looked at the map additions she'd made. I found something. 2 weeks ago, about 8 miles east of here, on State 14, there's a convoy staging area, at a rest stop. Trucks, not the box truck type, bigger, and there's a bulletin board in the rest stop, still standing, and someone has been putting information on it. Paper sheets, current stuff, dated within the week, about road conditions, infected concentrations, locations to avoid. She paused. And one sheet about a place north of here. About 140 miles, up in the hill country. Large facility with power, medical, food stores, controlled access. The sheet says they're taking verified survivors. I looked at her. Verified how? Doesn't say. And you trust this information? I don't trust anything, she said. But I went back 3 times and the board gets updated. That's real. Someone's maintaining it. I thought about the note on the board. I thought about the L7 group, with their systematic supply runs, and their clearing radio language. I thought about the convoy. Then I thought about whether those things were connected, whether the bulletin board and the convoy and the L7 group were all parts of something bigger that I didn't have enough of to see. I want to check that board, I said. I know the way. Day 136. We go together, which is a strange experience after 4 months of going everywhere alone. Patty moves well, efficient, not flashy, with the very specific composure of someone in a medical profession who spent years learning to keep their movements controlled in tight spaces. We take the bicycles, she had one too, stored in the bush behind the scrapyard fence, and we go the route she scouted, which avoids the main roads and cuts through about 3 miles of field and tree line. The rest stop on State 14 is a standard highway pull-off, a paved area, some covered concrete picnic structures, a brick building with bathrooms, and a small metal post bulletin board on a concrete pad near the entrance. The brick building has 2 infected inside it. We can hear them moving around behind the window, bumping into things, not going anywhere in particular. There are 4 infected visible in the parking area, scattered in the loose way they scatter when nothing is pulling them in a specific direction. We approach from the south fence line, staying on foot with the bikes stashed in the brush. I use the sound trick on the northwest side of the lot, pulling the infected in the parking area toward the far end. Patty watches and nods once when she sees it work. She'd heard me describe it on the walkout, but hadn't seen it in practice. The bulletin board has 7 sheets on it. They're held with thumbtacks, covered with a piece of clear plastic sheet that someone's taped over the board surface to keep rain off, which is a detail that tells you someone has been maintaining this for a while and put some thought into it. I read all 7 sheets. I read them twice. Patty reads them too. 6 of the sheets are what she described: road conditions, infected concentrations, practical navigation information for this corridor, updated in the past week, based on the dates written in the upper right corner. The 7th sheet is different. It's typed, not handwritten. A different paper stock from the others. Whiter, cleaner. It reads, Clearwater Station, North Compound active since day 60. Population currently 87. Medical staff on site. Power from wind plus solar hybrid. Greenhouse growing season established. Verified survivors only. See contact protocol below. Contact protocol. Radio channel 22. Call sign North Station. 0700 and 190 Jelly. Provide location. Party size. Condition. Awaiting acknowledgement before approach. Do not approach without radio contact first. Note: we are aware of the L7 supply network. We are not affiliated. If you have information about L7 activities in your area, this is relevant to us. Channel 22. I read that last part 3 times. Not affiliated. If you have information about L7, this is relevant. I look at Patty. She's looking at the same line. That's not a coincidence, she said. No, I said, it's not. We stayed at the board for about 4 more minutes, reading and remembering, and then we got back on the bikes. On the way back, I'm turning things over. The Clearwater Station sheet being typed is detail 1. That means whoever put it there either has a working printer, which requires power and supplies, or they typed it elsewhere and brought it. Both options imply organization. The population of 87 is detail 2. That's not a rough estimate. That's a count, which means the count matters to whoever wrote it, which means they're keeping track. Detail 3 is, we are aware of the L7 supply network. Aware means they have information, which means either surveillance capability or someone who transferred from L7, or informants. Whatever Clearwater Station is, they're paying attention. The question I can't resolve on the bike ride back is whether they're what they say they are. The supply network of organized survivors with a working facility and 87 people could be everything I need. It could also be a harvesting operation, a group that collects survivors and treats them as resources rather than people. Those things can look identical from a distance, and sometimes look identical even from inside them. I've seen both types, in their early stages. In the first 3 weeks when I was still on the road, before I made it to the scrapyard, I passed through 2 towns. One had a community organization that was actually functional and actually caring for people. I could tell the difference by one thing. In the real one, the people in charge didn't carry their weapons all the time. In the other one, every person with any authority had a gun on them at all times, including in the middle of a resource distribution event. I can't assess Clearwater from 140 miles out. I'm going to need more information. Day 137. I tell Dale. Not everything. Not about Patty. Not yet, because that's not mine to tell, and Patty and I haven't discussed how much to share. But I tell him about the bulletin board and the Clearwater information and the L7 mention. He listens. He makes his nail face. Then he says, the convoy. What about it? I've seen convoy trucks twice in the past week. Early morning, going north. Different type than the box truck. Big flatbeds with containers. He pauses. Both times they had a 2-vehicle escort. One in front, one behind. Armed. I hadn't seen this. I've been spending my mornings inside or in the near vicinity of the yard. Dale, sitting in his booth, has a line of sight to a section of the road through a gap in the corrugated wall panel, and apparently, he's been watching it every morning for longer than I knew. Armed how? I said. Rifles, he said. Both escort vehicles had people hanging off them with rifles, not defensive posture, not like they're expecting trouble, like they're showing something. Showing something, making a display, that's not the posture of a group protecting a convoy from infected. That's the posture of a group making sure other survivors don't interfere. Which direction north? I said. He told me the direction. It aligned with the route Patty had described following the L7 truck toward the Hill Country facility. 2 large flatbeds with container loads, heavily escorted, going north regularly. What's in the containers? This is the question that keeps pulling at me over the next several days. Day 140. Patty and I have been talking every day or two. We've worked out a system. She comes to the yard from her alternate location, usually in the morning, and we compare notes. She's been doing something I haven't done, listening to radio traffic more broadly. She has a small battery radio with a squelch control that she's been scanning channels with when she's at her secondary location, which has a better elevated position than the yard. What she's picked up in the past week. Channel 14, L7 check-ins, standard. 7 here, all clear. Multiple unit designations suggesting at least 8 to 10 people in the network. Channel 22, twice. Very brief transmissions she couldn't fully hear from her position, but the call sign was North Station, which is what Clearwater listed as their channel. And something else. On a frequency she almost missed. A short burst digital signal. Not voice. Data. Repeated 3 times daily. She'd seen similar things before. She'd worked briefly in an emergency medicine communications context and knew what field radio protocols looked like. The digital signal had the structure of an automated beacon rather than deliberate communication, like a homing signal. Not from Clearwater. The direction was wrong. This was coming from somewhere east-northeast, maybe 20 miles. A homing signal means something is being tracked, or something is broadcasting its location. This is the thing that starts to change everything. Day 143. I've been at this location for 4 months and 11 days. I've consumed roughly 40% of my initial supplies, with resupply bringing me back up to a comfortable level. I've done 16 supply runs of varying size. I've had 0 direct contact with infected. I've been close enough to touch them on 4 occasions and avoided each time. I've seen 1 human death that I couldn't prevent. Someone, alone, I found on day 34 in the residential area east of the yard, already dead, from what looked like a wound that had gone infected. A type of infection that isn't the type that changes you, just the type that kills you if you don't treat it. I covered them with a tarp and moved on. I've been thinking about the containers on the convoy trucks. I've been thinking about the digital signal from east-northeast. I've been thinking about what a systematic supply network that uses a numbering system for its people and is described as something Clearwater wants information about is actually doing out here. The thing is, freight distribution networks are something I know. I've been moving things around this country for 20 years. I know how a distribution network looks when it's functioning, and I know what it looks like when something in the network is wrong, because the wrong thing shows up in the weight distribution, the route consistency, the timing, the security levels. You can read a freight network like a body language if you know what you're looking for. The L7 network has something wrong in it. The wrongness is the escort security on those convoy trucks. You don't put 2 armed escort vehicles on a supply run of food and building materials. That security profile is for something you need to keep moving and don't want stopped. Either because it's valuable in a way that invites attack, or because it's valuable in a way that invites rescue. Rescue. Not a supply convoy, a transport. I write this down and sit with it for an hour. Then I talk to Patty. The containers, she said. She said it slow, like she was feeling the shape of the word in her mouth. Think about it from a freight logistics angle, I said. High security, consistent schedule, repeated runs. That's not how you move canned goods. That's how you move something that can call for help. She was quiet for a while. You think they're moving people. I think they might be moving people who don't want to be moved. Patty has a more specific expression for bad news than most people. It's not upset, exactly. It's the expression of a person who has heard bad news in professional contexts often enough that their face has developed a particular default setting for it. A kind of neutrality that's slightly too deliberate to be natural, like a face slightly after the actual receiving of the news. That changes what Clearwater wants from us, she said. If L7 is moving captive survivors, then Clearwater isn't just looking for information. They're looking for a way to disrupt that movement. And we're in the middle of the network. We're sitting next to one of their supply staging points. We've been watching their patterns for weeks. We know their check-in schedule, their route, their timing. She was quiet again. Then, what do you want to do? I'd thought about this a lot before bringing it to her. I knew what I wanted to do, and I'd been trying to talk myself out of it for 2 days. I couldn't talk myself out of it. Not completely. I want to contact Clearwater, I said, and I want to give them what we know. And then we see what they do with it. Day 144. The radio contact problem. I have a radio, but my radio is a basic CB unit that doesn't reach channel 22 in the VHF band, where Clearwater is broadcasting. Patty's radio is receive only on that band. She can listen but can't transmit. We need a transmitting radio with VHF capability. The L7 group left a radio unit in the rail yard. In the warehouse, the person who said 7 here was using something. I've been in that warehouse twice since my first visit. The second time, I confirmed the radio is there. It's in the small office at the back of Warehouse 1, mounted in a charging cradle, and it's a Motorola XPR 5550, which is a professional-grade digital mobile radio that has full VHF capability. It's not what I'd design a covert communication system around, but it will do exactly what I need it to do. The problem is that taking it will immediately tell them someone's been in the warehouse, and I can't take it and return it. Once I use it to contact Clearwater, it needs to be somewhere that doesn't lead back to me. Patty has a better idea. She says she can access the rail yard from the north end through a section of fence she's scouted, while I provide the sound distraction from the roadside. She'll get in, get the radio, and we use it once to contact Clearwater from a location that's not the scrapyard. Then we leave it somewhere that's findable by L7, with no indication of where it went between being in the office and where they find it. This is genuinely cleaner than my plan, which was more involved. I tell her this. She says, "I've been planning contingencies for longer than you have. I just didn't have anyone to run them with until now." Day 145. The rail yard operation takes 4 hours. Patty goes in from the north at 5 a.m. I position myself on the roadside and use the sound trick to pull the 2 infected near the warehouse toward the fence on the far end. She's in the warehouse in under 3 minutes. 8 minutes later, she's at the fence on the north end. She has the radio. We move east, along the back roads, to a position Patty has scouted. A water tower at the edge of a small industrial park, maybe 2 miles from the rail yard. We climb the maintenance ladder on the water tower, at elevation, both for line-of-sight radio improvement and to see whether anyone's coming. At 7 a.m. exactly, Patty tunes the Motorola to channel 22 and keys the mic. North Station, this is road contact, 7 miles south of State 14 intersection at County 7. We have information about L7. Please respond. We wait. At 7:06, a voice responds. Male, calm, clipped. The particular tone of someone who's done radio work. Road contact. This is North Station. Reading you clear. Authenticate. What color is the bulletin board frame at your contact location? Patty looked at me. I thought back to the board. Red, I said. She keyed the mic. Red. Pause. Then, authenticated. You said L7 information. Go ahead. Patty looked at me. This was the moment. Once we said what we knew, we were in it. I nodded. She talked for about 8 minutes. She covered everything we'd observed. The unit designations, the check-in schedule, the convoy timing, the route, the armed escort vehicles, and what that security profile implied. The digital homing signal from east-northeast. I added the warehouse inventory data, the fuel cache location, the staging patterns. When she finished, there was a longer pause than before. Then the voice said, "Stand by." We stood by for about 3 minutes on top of a water tower in the early morning, with the wind moving through the structure below us. Then, road contact. Can you get to a position to observe the convoy route on County 7 North by 09:30 tomorrow? I looked at Patty. She keyed the mic. Affirmative. We need a count and description of the convoy. Vehicles, configuration, cargo containers if visible. Don't interfere, don't be seen, just count. Copy. We'll contact you on this channel at 1900 tonight to confirm. Leave this radio where you can retrieve it. Don't carry it to your base. We looked at each other. He knew we had a base, or suspected. Copy, she said again. The radio went to receive. We waited until 1900 exactly, and the same voice checked in, confirmed the next morning's observation task, and added one piece of information. The signal you picked up east-northeast. We know about it. That's an asset. We'll explain when we can. An asset. A person, maybe. With a locator. Someone they know about and are tracking. We left the radio in the hollow of a fence post at the base of the water tower, noted the location for pickup, and went back separately. Day 146. The observation run on County 7 North requires positioning before 9 a.m., which means being in place well before sunrise. I go alone. Patty goes to her secondary location to listen to radio traffic during the operation, because having 2 people on an observation post doubles the noise and visibility risk. I position in a drainage culvert under County 7, about 400 yards north of the main scrapyard turnoff. The culvert is concrete, 4 feet in diameter, and runs under the road in a slight depression that gives me a direct sightline south along the road through the culvert opening. I've brought a notepad and a pen. I'm wearing my best drab clothing, dark gray work pants, a brown canvas jacket that's been in the mud enough times to look like it's been in the mud enough times. At 9:14 a.m., the convoy comes. First vehicle, a pickup truck, dark green, 2 men visible, both with rifles, moving at maybe 25 miles per hour. Second vehicle, a large flatbed, a proper commercial flatbed, 48 feet, with 2 ISO shipping containers chained to it. The containers are standard size, 20 feet each. They are old, weathered, some rust on the corner fittings, and they are ventilated. Each container has a series of bolted holes along the top edge, maybe 1-inch diameter, not standard container configuration. Third vehicle, another flatbed, same configuration, 2 containers, ventilated. Fourth vehicle, a larger truck, enclosed box body, no markings. Fifth vehicle, another pickup, same as the first, same armed riders. I write every detail in the notepad, times, speeds, descriptions, the direction the armed riders are facing, outward, not inward, which is ambiguous. I count the holes in the visible container sides, 8 holes on the facing wall of the first container, evenly spaced, deliberately cut, not deterioration. The convoy passes in about 40 seconds and disappears around the curve north. I lie in the culvert for 20 more minutes, in case there's a trailing vehicle or any rearward sweep. Nothing. I climb out of the culvert and walk back to the scrapyard. I look at what I've written, and I look at the ventilation holes, and I think about what Patty said when I described the escort profile. People who don't want to be moved. Or people who the movers are trying not to kill, because you put ventilation holes in containers when you're moving something that breathes. Day 147. The 7 p.m. radio contact that night is different from the previous ones. A different voice, female, older, with an accent I can't place, not regional American, something Northern European, running underneath the English. She identifies herself as North Station Actual, which is how you say, the person actually in charge, over military-style radio. She says, "What you observed is consistent with what we know. We've been tracking this convoy for 3 weeks. We have reason to believe the containers are carrying people. We don't yet know the destination. The facility north, on the hill country route," Patty said. That's one possibility. But the route we've observed doesn't end there. It continues north, and then curves east, on roads that don't have much on them. A brief pause. We're planning an interception, but we need the exact route, the exact timing, and we need to know what's at the end point. You want us to follow it. We want eyes close to the convoy that we don't have. You're already positioned. Another pause. We can offer you a place at Clearwater when this is done. Verified entry, medical assessment on arrival, integration into the community. Patty and I looked at each other in the failing light. We were on the water tower again for the broadcast. "How do we know Clearwater is what you say?" I said. The woman on the radio was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You don't. I know that. The best I can offer is that we put that bulletin board there months ago. We've maintained it, and we haven't used it to set a trap, or everyone who responded to it would already be at the facility you call L7. You can verify that by asking whether anyone you know has gone to the board and then had a bad outcome." She was right. Patty had been to the board 3 times. Nothing had followed her there. "Give us until tomorrow morning," Patty said. "Copy. Call at 0700. That night, in the trailer, I can't sleep. I lie on the cot, and I look at what I've built. 4 months of work. The solar array that I planned for weeks before everything fell apart. The rain collection that almost didn't fit through the manifold I'd engineered wrong the first time. The door system that I still feel quietly proud of. The storage bays under the floor. The notebook full of supply records and observations and notes about sound behavior and the habits of the infected. The decoy trailers with their staged evidence of prior occupation. Dale's booth in the northwest corner, and the 2 men buried in his northeast corner. The map that Patty drew, with additions to both of our knowledge. This is my life, right now. This is the actual physical structure of my life. This 53-foot box in a scrapyard off a county road, in a part of the country that nobody outside a 30-mile radius had heard of before. And the question is, do I leave it? Not permanently. Clearwater said, eyes on the convoy. Follow it. Find the end point. That could mean a day. Could mean 3. I could come back. The trailer would still be here. Unless something happened while I was gone. Unless L7 came back to the scrapyard in a more serious way. Unless something happened and Dale was alone here. I think about Dale for a long time. The man who told me his 2 employees were buried in his corner, and that his booth was his booth. Who has been watching the road through his gap in the corrugated wall every morning without being asked to. I get up at 4 a.m., and I go to his booth, and I knock in our pattern. He answers immediately again. I tell him everything. This time everything, including Patty, including Clearwater, including the convoy. He listens, and his face does very little, and when I'm done, he is quiet for about 30 seconds. Then he says, the holes in the containers. Yes, I said. People. Most likely. He nodded once. Then, go. Dale, I can be quiet for 3 days. I've been quiet in this booth for 4 months. Go find out what's at the end of that road. I looked at him. If something happens. If something happens, I'll deal with it. He paused. The young woman. Patty. What about her? She drew that map before you got here. She's good. He said it simply. No particular warmth in it, just assessment. Take care of each other. Day 148. The 7 a.m. radio contact. We told North Station yes. The female voice, she never gave a name, and I didn't ask, because in this context, names are trust currency, and you don't give them until you have a reason. Told us the convoy runs every 3 days. The next run is 36 hours from now, based on the schedule we'd observed. She gave us a series of checkpoints to report from, using the Motorola. She confirmed the route would begin on County 7 and turn north before hitting the main State 14 intersection. She also told us the thing about the digital signal. The asset, she'd called it. It was a person, a member of the original L7 group who had turned and was now feeding information north to Clearwater. The homing signal was a modified personal locator beacon they were carrying. The signal told Clearwater where the person was. That person was currently in the North Hill Country facility, the big L7 structure that Patty had tracked the truck to. If the convoy reaches that facility, we don't know what happens to the containers, the voice said. We think they're not held there. We think they're passed on. To where? Patty said. That's what we need you to find out. We spent the day preparing. I cached 4 days of food and water from the trailer supplies into 2 packs. I left a detailed handwritten note for Dale, our radio channel, the North Station contact protocol, what to do if L7 came into the yard while we were gone. I checked every system in the trailer, updated the inventory, set the door system. I wrote, Day 148, gone 3 days, plan to return, in the notebook. I closed the trailer and locked it. I stood outside it for a moment. The yard smelled like rust and old oil, and the particular damp concrete smell that comes up in the morning when the temperature changes. The chain was tapping on the post in the southwest corner. 3 trailers in a row, mine among them, looking identical from where I stood, invisible. That was the whole point. I turned and walked to where Patty was waiting at the northwest fence. We tracked the convoy from the edges of County 7, moving parallel to the road in the field and brush line on the west side. 2 bicycles, each loaded with the packs, moving slowly enough to not generate noise at any point where there was a sight line to the road. The convoy came at 9:18, exactly on the schedule I'd calculated from the pattern. We tracked it north for about 3 miles before the road curved, and we had to cross to the east side to maintain parallel position without losing visual. Crossing was the riskiest move of the day. 4 seconds of total exposure on the road, sprinting with the bicycles. We each picked a moment in the cover between convoy intervals, crossed separately, took up new positions on the east brush line. The convoy continued north. At about the 7-mile point, it turned right, east, onto a gravel road that wasn't marked on the road atlas I'd found in the house on week 2 and had been carrying since. Patty had been down this area, but not this specific road. We followed at distance on foot, leaving the bikes concealed in brush, checking with the Motorola at 1 p.m. per the scheduled contact. North Station confirmed. They were tracking the locator beacon. It was moving east, consistent with our convoy direction. We followed the gravel road for 2 more miles on foot. The terrain shifted, more wooded, hillier, less agricultural. The infected count dropped noticeably. Not many people had lived out here, which meant not many infected were here now. Then the tree line opened up, and we could see the facility from the ridge. It was bigger than I'd expected, a former industrial site of some kind. The main structure was a large metal-framed building, maybe 200 feet long, with a partial second structure attached. Generator exhaust was visible. There were at least 8 vehicles in the lot. The perimeter was fenced, not chain link, something heavier, and I could see at least 2 guard positions from where we crouched. The convoy was pulling in through the main gate as we watched. I had binoculars. I'd pulled them from a sporting goods store on an early scavenging run and been carrying them since. I watched through them as the flatbeds pulled around to the far side of the main building and disappeared behind it. "We need to get closer," Patty said. I looked at her. I looked at the facility. I looked at the armed guards on the perimeter who were watching the convoy arrive and not, at the moment, watching the ridgeline. "When dark," I said. "When dark," she agreed. We settled into the ridge. 6 hours of waiting, which in the field means 6 hours of lying in the brush with your body not moving, but your brain doing everything it wants to do. Mine went to the trailer. Not in a sentimental way. Just tracking the systems. The way you track systems when you've built something you're responsible for. Solar charge curve over the afternoon. Should be at 80% by 4 p.m. given the weather. Water tank at the level it was when I left. Minus Dale's usage if he dips into the supply tap I've connected to the exterior of my trailer at the back for exactly this purpose. The door system holding. The decoys staying where I left them. I went through the whole inventory in my head. It was a comfort. In the way that familiar things are a comfort when you're doing something unfamiliar. Patty noticed. She was lying 3 feet from me in the brush, and she turned her head and said, very quietly, "What are you thinking about?" "My trailer," I said. "Right now. Right now." She was quiet for a moment. "What's it like inside?" So I told her. I described the cot and the fold-out table and the storage bays and the door system and the solar setup. I described the sight glass for the water tank, how I knew what level it was without getting up. I described the notebook on the shelf. I described the smell of it in the evening, when the propane burner had been going, and the air was warm, and carried some trace of whatever I'd cooked. She listened without interrupting. When I was done, she said, "I have a place like that, a farmhouse kitchen that I grew up in. I go there in my head when I need something to steady me." I didn't ask more. She didn't offer more. We lay in the brush and waited for dark. Dark in the hill country comes gradually, which is useful because it gives you time to find your positions before you lose the last light. We moved down from the ridge at dusk, working through the tree line toward the east side of the facility, which had the lightest guard coverage from what we'd observed. The east fence was a standard chain link, 6 feet, no barbed wire on top. Whoever set up this facility had done it quickly and hadn't gotten to the fencing improvements yet. We found a position in the trees about 30 feet from the fence and settled in. Through the binoculars, I could see the far side of the main building from this angle. The containers from the convoy flatbeds were still on the trucks. They hadn't been unloaded. The trucks were parked with their cabs pointing north, which meant they were oriented for departure, not storage. They weren't unloading the containers here. This was a staging point. I checked in with North Station at 1900, gave the size and configuration of the facility, confirmed the convoy's arrival, told them the containers hadn't been unloaded. North Station, the female voice said, "Copy, we're moving. We'll need your position to coordinate." "Moving now?" "We have a team that's been staged 20 miles west of your position. They've been waiting for the convoy to reach the far facility. This is it." A brief pause. "We need you to stay on and update us as the containers move." "How long?" I said. "As long as it takes. We'll reach your position by 0400 at the latest." I told Patty. She nodded. Once. We settled in to wait again. At 1 a.m., something happened that I hadn't expected. One of the containers opened. Not from the outside. From the inside. The push-bar mechanism, the interior emergency release that's standard on shipping containers for exactly this reason, for people who get accidentally locked inside, engaged from within, and one of the container doors swung out about 18 inches. A hand appeared in the gap, just a hand, pale in the dim worklight that was spilling from the building's exterior fixtures. Then nothing for about 30 seconds. Then the hand disappeared, and the door closed back. Not latched. I could see from the gap that it wasn't latching, just resting closed. I grabbed Patty's arm. She'd seen it. We had 2 guards on the visible side of the building. One of them was at the north corner. The other was near the building entrance, 30 feet from the trucks. Neither one was watching the trucks directly. "We can't," she said quietly. "I know. They'll see. I know." I kept watching the truck, the gap in the container door. But someone's in there who knows how to get out, which means they're waiting for something. Or they've been in there long enough that they needed air, and they cracked it for a minute. I thought about the ventilation holes. 8 holes, 1-inch diameter. Over a long transit time, that would get stale fast. Crack it and close it. Keep doing it without being seen. She looked at me. "How long have they been in those containers?" I thought about the timing. The convoy arrived here mid-afternoon. If they staged from the scrapyard adjacent area, they'd have loaded the previous evening at the latest. So, at least 18 hours. Maybe 20. Too long, I said. We sat there in the brush and I held the binoculars on that truck, and I thought about what was right, which is a thing I have not let myself think about very much over the past 4.5 months, because what was right and what was survivable were often pointing in very different directions, and I had been choosing survivable because survivable was the only choice that had options after it. This one was different. At 1:45 a.m., I made a decision that went against every system I'd built. I told Patty I was going to pull one guard away from the truck using the sound trick. I had my rattle rig in the pack. She would watch the second guard from the tree line. If the second guard moved toward the trucks, she'd signal me with 2 clicks on the radio's push-to-talk button. No voice, just the click. I'd hear it and stop. If neither guard moved to the trucks in the 2 minutes after I created the distraction, I would go to the container. I'd open the door, I'd talk to whoever was inside, and then I'd make a decision from there. "This is," she started. "I know," I said. "If it goes wrong, we lose the convoy observation. North Station loses their intelligence. If there are people in those containers and we're 30 feet away doing nothing, then I don't know what any of this is for," I said. She looked at me for a long moment. 2 clicks, she said. 2 clicks, I said. The sound trick on a facility perimeter is different from the sound trick on an infected. It's a distraction for a human, which means it needs to be more specific, not just a noise, but a purposeful sounding noise, coming from a plausible direction that would cause a guard to investigate rather than alert. I threw the rattle rig over the north fence, targeting a section of gravel about 60 feet from the first guard's position. It landed, slid, the cans rattled. The sound was enough to sound like something falling, not like a signal. The first guard went north to check. He was armed, and he called something to the second guard, who turned to look in his direction. For about 20 seconds, both guards were oriented away from the trucks. I came out of the tree line at a run, crossing the 30 feet to the fence, vaulting it. 6 feet of chain link in full kit is something you can do if you've been thinking about doing it for a week. Dropping to the far side, 2 steps to the truck, pulling the container door. It opened. Inside, 4 people, in the back half of the container. They were sitting on the floor with their backs against the container wall, and all 4 of them looked at me in the way that people look when they've been in the dark and something changes. That specific alertness that hasn't had time to resolve into relief or fear. A man in the front looked at me and said, quietly but clearly, "About time." I almost laughed. I said very quietly, "We have about 90 seconds. There are 2 guards. There's a team coming that's going to intercept this convoy, but they're 2 hours out. I need you to stay in here for 2 more hours." He looked at me steadily. 2 hours. North Station is coming. Something in his face changed at that. He turned to the others. Some exchange I wasn't part of. A shared understanding passing among them that I didn't have context for. Then he turned back to me. "North Station asked us to hold position," he said. "That's what the signal is for. We heard it 2 days ago. Hold position. A locator signal. The person with the locator was inside the containers. The asset wasn't the person at the facility. The asset was in here. 2 hours, I said again. He nodded. "Close it." I closed the door. I turned and ran back to the fence, vaulted it, dropped into the tree line. I was on my stomach in the brush within about 8 seconds. The guards were coming back from the north end of the lot. Neither one was looking at the truck. Patty put her hand on my shoulder for exactly 1 second and then removed it. I got on the radio. The North Station voice, when I explained what had just happened, was silent for about 4 seconds. Then, the signal. "The asset is in the container. I talked to 4 people. The man in front knew your name. He said they'd received a signal to hold." "Yes." Another pause. "That changes the timeline. We're pushing the team forward." A brief burst of what might have been radio communication on another channel, handled fast. "We'll reach your position in 90 minutes. The convoy is positioned for departure," I said. "They may move before you get here. If they move, stay with them as long as you can, and keep reporting position. Do not interfere again." I heard the word again. "Copy," I said. The next 90 minutes were the longest sustained alert state I've been in since the first week of all this. Patty and I lay in the brush and watched the facility. The guards made their rounds. The trucks didn't move. No one went near the containers. At 3:15 a.m., a sound came from the north. Engines. Multiple. Coming slow. No lights. The North Station team. They came from the north and west simultaneously. I didn't see them until they were at the facility perimeter, which meant they were good at moving without showing themselves, which meant something about who they were. 4 vehicles. They came in without announcement. Not a raid, more of a presentation. The vehicles stopped outside the perimeter, and one set of headlights came on, pointed at the main facility entrance. A voice on a loudspeaker, the female voice I now recognized, said, "L7 facility personnel, this is North Station. We are not here to harm anyone. We are here for the containers. Let them go and we leave." 20 seconds of silence from the facility. Then the lights in the main building went out. I didn't see what happened in the next 4 minutes, because I was lying in the brush and couldn't see clearly. I heard 2 exchanges of radio communication on the L7 frequency. Brief, tense, the kind of communication that happens when the people doing it haven't decided what to do yet. I heard one vehicle engine start inside the facility and then stop. Then the main gate opened. The trucks with the containers drove out through the gate and stopped 15 feet outside it. North Station vehicles moved forward. People got out. 3 figures approached the containers from the North Station side. The containers opened. I watched from the tree line as people came out of the containers. Not 4, more than that. 8, 9, maybe 10. They came out slowly, the way people do when they've been in a confined space for a long time. Some of them needed steadying. The man who'd told me about time came out and looked around the compound exterior until, somehow, he found the tree line where Patty and I were lying. He couldn't have seen us, but he looked in our direction and he made a small gesture, like someone tipping a cap. On the drive back, They gave us a vehicle, one of the North Station trucks, with someone who knew the roads. Patty slept in the passenger seat with her head against the window for the whole 2 hours. I stayed awake in the back because I couldn't sleep yet. The sky started doing things in the east by the time we were an hour out, that early gray that comes before the actual color. I thought about the trailer. I thought about getting back to the trailer, about the door system and the click of the pneumatic valve releasing, and the way the interior smelled in the morning, the notebook on the shelf, the water gauge, the sight glass. The Clearwater representative, a woman named Dr. Lena Forsyth, who'd been the voice on the radio and was younger in person than she'd sounded, maybe 40, with the specific alert exhaustion of someone who's been running an operation for weeks on inadequate sleep, had given us a clear account of what she knew about L7 during the debrief that happened at the convoy site in the early morning. L7 was a resource harvesting operation, but not the kind I'd been most afraid of. They weren't killing people. They were collecting them and moving them to a facility far to the east, where they were being held as labor, not well, not humanely, but not killed. The containers were the transport method. The systematic supply runs through the local rail yard, and distribution centers were partly genuine resource gathering for the eastern facility and partly scouting for potential labor sources. The scrapyard had been on their list. They'd assessed it as low priority after the staged trailer contents and the lumberyard tip. The decoy had worked. Dr. Forsyth. She asked me to call her Lena, which I did once, and then reverted to Dr. Forsyth, because I'd been talking to someone who felt like a doctor for the past week, and I couldn't recalibrate quickly. Said Clearwater had been tracking L7 for 6 weeks. The interception tonight was something they'd been building toward. The asset in the container was a member of the original L7 logistics team who had agreed to go in voluntarily with the transported group, carrying the locator, to provide confirmation of the cargo when the time came. His name's Owen, she said. He'll want to thank you. He already did, I said. Sort of. She looked at me. Will you come back with us, Clearwater? I sat with that for a moment. I need to go back to my trailer first. She waited. I have an old man who's been keeping watch. He deserves to know what happened before I decide anything. She nodded. The offer stands. Take the time you need. Day 149. We get back to the scrapyard at 6:30 a.m. The North Station vehicle drops us at the County Road 7 turnoff and keeps going. They have things to do and places to be, and I understand that. I walk to the south fence. I check the gate. Still closed, still my chain. The wire tie is intact. I slip through and walk to the trailer row. My trailer looks exactly as I left it. Third unit from the south fence, in the row with the others, faded white. A little rust along the lower frame rail. The cheap padlock doing its convincing impression. I go around to the back. I find the hidden key cylinder next to the rust spot. I turn it. I push the pneumatic valve inside, hear the hiss, feel the bars release. The door swings open. The trailer smells like it always smells. Wood and metal, and the faint trace of propane, and the specific dusty warmth of a closed space in the morning. The water gauge is at the same level I left it. The notebook is on the shelf. The cot is where I left it. I sit down on it. I sit there for about 10 minutes, just breathing the familiar air of the place. Then I knock the interior wall once, which has been our signal to Dale that I'm back, a signal I came up with before I left and told him to listen for. 30 seconds later, a knock back on the exterior. 2, pause, 1. I unlock the door and Dale is standing outside, looking like himself. Not worried, not relieved, just present. Well, he said. It's over, I said. L7, or that part of it. There'll be more to deal with. But the convoy is done. He absorbed this. The people in the containers. Safe. With Clearwater. He nodded once. Clearwater has a facility, I said. About 140 miles north. They're offering us a place there. Both of us. Proper setup. Medical, power, food production. He looked at me steadily. And if I say no, then we talk about what that means. He turned and looked back at his booth, at the corrugated wall panel, at the I-beam wall that hid it. My 2 boys are in the northeast corner, he said. I know. I put them there. I closed their eyes. I dug the holes myself. A long pause. A man doesn't leave the place where he buried his people. I understood that. I understood it completely. I'd felt something like it about the trailer, about what it meant to me, and the trailer hadn't even been where I'd buried anyone. Okay, I said. You should go. I'm not going anywhere yet. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. He said, You've got the same affliction I do. What's that? You built something. Now you can't leave it. He looked at me. Except, you can. I can't. That's the difference. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said, I'll think about it. Think fast. That lumber yard is only going to hold their attention for so long. I almost actually laughed. I went back inside the trailer and sat at the fold-out table and opened the notebook to a new page and wrote, Day 149, back. Then I looked at the page for a while. Outside, the chain was tapping in the southwest corner. The wind was coming from the same direction it had been coming from for days. Somewhere in the east end of the yard, I couldn't tell if there were infected or not. Didn't matter right now. Patty came to the yard around midday. She'd been to her secondary location to collect some things, she said. She was carrying a pack that was fuller than usual. We sat in the trailer, the first time she'd been in my trailer instead of hers, and I made coffee on the propane burner, and we sat at the fold-out table that fit 2 people if they didn't mind being close to each other. She looked at the water gauge. She looked at the battery panel. She looked at the notebook on the shelf. You going to go? She said. You? I don't have a reason to stay here specifically. I have reasons to stay somewhere that works. She looked at me. This works. Yeah, I said. It does. But it works better if the L7 situation is actually resolved. And Dr. Forsyth said it's not fully resolved. There are other nodes in their network. I know. So Clearwater might have access to more intelligence, better resources, people who can actually push back on this systematically. I know that too. She looked at me. You're going to keep thinking about it. I'm going to think about it, I said. She drank her coffee. She looked at the trailer interior the way you look at something when you're trying to memorize it. Day 152. 3 days of something close to normal. I do 2 short supply runs. The rail yard, which is cleared of all L7 equipment now. Just a rail yard again with its food stores still partially intact. Patty comes on one of them and we move efficiently and quietly, and carry back more than I would have alone. I do routine maintenance. Check the solar connections. Test the water pump. Oil the door hinges. I update the notebook inventory. I also do something I haven't done before. I write down the layout of the trailer in detail. Dimensions, locations of all storage bays, the door system specs, the battery bank configuration. The kind of information that would let someone reconstruct it if they needed to. Not for me. I already know all of it. Patty watches me do this and doesn't ask, which means she understands what it means. On day 152 evening, I knock on Dale's booth in our pattern. He opens the door and looks at me. I'm going to go to Clearwater, I said. He looked at me for a long moment. I know. You have enough supply in the yard to last a while. I'm leaving the exterior tap connected to the trailer tank. You can draw water when you need it. I know. The northwest gap is rebraced. You know where it is. The new exit is the south fence, corner post with the notch. I know. If anyone comes, I'll deal with it, he said. I looked at him. I looked at his booth, and the I-beam wall, and the northeast corner beyond it. I looked at the man who had been in this yard for 60 years, and who would be in it until he wasn't. I'll come back, I said. If there's a way, I'll come back. He made his almost laugh sound. Don't make promises about the future, he said. Just make promises about today. I thought about that. Today, I'm going to make sure you have everything you need before I leave. That, he said, I'll take. We shook hands. His grip was firm in the way that old working hands are firm, not trying to be strong, just being what they are. I went back to my trailer and finished packing. Day 153. The morning I leave, I'm up before the light. I do the full systems check one more time. Solar, charging. Battery bank, 92%. Water tank, full. I've filled it from rain collection over the past 3 days, and a carry run to the nearest accessible water point. Food in the bays. I've left what I'm not taking. It's enough for Dale to supplement what he has for months. I leave the door system armed. I leave the exterior tap accessible. I leave the notebook, not all of it. I've pulled out the pages with the most operational detail that I'll need for traveling. But the inventory records and the supply observations and the scavenge maps stay in the trailer, stored in the sealed bag I keep for exactly this purpose. I stand in the middle of the trailer in the red headlamp light and look at what I built. 53 feet of my own work, 4 months of being invisible, the decision I made before things fell apart, the forward thinking that wasn't prescience, just practicality, just a gut feeling that I'd been nursing for 18 months, and that turned out to be exactly right. I am glad I built this. I am glad I found this yard. I am glad I met Dale Prentice, who told me his booth was his booth, and has never once been wrong about anything important. I turn off the headlamp. I sit in the dark for maybe 2 minutes. Then I go. The road north on County 7 is different when you're moving on it instead of watching it. I've been watching it for 4 months from the trailer slit, watching trucks and vehicles and the occasional person on foot. And now I'm a thing on it instead of someone watching a thing. Patty is with me. We've loaded the North Station truck they left for us. A pickup, basic, nothing fancy. I've got my 2 rifles in the back, my personal kit, the relevant pages from the notebook. She's got her medical kit, which is substantial, and her pack. We pull out of the County Road 7 turnoff at 5:45 a.m., with the sky doing its early thing. I drive because I've been driving since I was 16, and the muscle memory of it is one of the most genuinely comfortable things left in my life. We pass the scrapyard on the left. I don't look at it. I know what it looks like. I know what it sounds like at night. I know what it smells like in the morning when the temperature shifts. I know what's inside the 3rd trailer from the south fence. The road opens up ahead. No infected visible on this stretch, which is consistent with what I know about infected density in this corridor. Sparse out here. The highway noise that used to attract them is gone, which has allowed the rural areas to thin out over the months as they drifted toward wherever sound was. I set a cruise pace, not fast. Fast on an uncertain road with uncertain hazards is how you end up in a ditch. Steady, deliberate. The speed that lets you react and still make ground. Patty's looking at the map. She's got the road atlas open and she's marking the route Dr. Forsyth gave us. 140 miles, 3 turns, and a specific approach road that we're supposed to take for the last 8 miles to avoid a stretch where infected concentration was last reported as high. "You're quiet," she says. "I drive quiet," I said. "Always have." She looks at the road. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about the drainage problem on the rain collection manifold. The one I had to rebuild twice. I think I'd do it differently the 3rd time. Shorter run on the secondary pipe, better gravity angle." She looks at me. "You're thinking about your trailer." "I'm always thinking about my trailer," I said. "It took 4 months to build. It's going to take more than 1 morning to stop thinking about it." She turns back to the road. After a moment she says, "When we come back." "When we come back," I said. She folds the atlas slightly to mark the next turn. I drive. The country between Killian Junction and the hill country north of it is the kind of landscape that used to go past your windows at 65 miles per hour and not stick. Rolling farmland, occasional creek bottoms, small town intersections with the standard complement of gas stations and farm supply stores, and the particular architecture of churches that sits in the Midwest, like something planted rather than built. All of it different now in the way that things go different when the normal activity level stops. The grass on the roadsides untrimmed and starting to reclaim the edges of the pavement. The traffic lights dark or blinking amber, where the backup power is still going. The parking lots that once held a controlled density of vehicles, now holding the same vehicles, but in different configurations, as people had moved them, driven them, abandoned them. I notice these things the way a driver notices road surface. Automatic, ambient, requiring no deliberate attention. At the 40-mile mark, we have our first infected encounter on the road. 4 of them on the highway shoulder, drifting in the loosely clustered way they drift when nothing specific is pulling them. They hear the truck and turn, start moving toward the road. I'm already past them before they close the distance. Patty watches them in the side mirror. "They'll wander back," she says. "They always do," I said. At the 80-mile mark, we stop at an intact fuel station to check the tank and take on what we can. The station's underground tanks are still holding fuel. I know from experience that underground storage tanks keep diesel viable for a long time, and this truck's on diesel. I carry a manual hand pump that attaches to the fill pipe, and I pump fuel until the truck tank is full, which takes about 20 minutes, and my arm. While I'm pumping, Patty goes into the attached convenience store. She's back in 4 minutes with 2 bags. Bottled water, some canned goods, a first aid kit still in its packaging that she says might have items she doesn't have, a flashlight and batteries, and, she holds this up last, a bag of beef jerky that has somehow survived intact. I accept the jerky with genuine gratitude. We get back on the road. At the 100-mile mark, we start seeing the infrastructure of someone who's been preparing an approach. A hand-painted sign on a highway overpass. County 22 North. Clearwater. Follow blue markers. Simple, unambiguous. Blue reflective tape on fence posts at irregular intervals, each visible from the previous one in daylight. Someone had walked this route and marked it for anyone who knew to look. I followed the blue markers. The last 8 miles takes us off the highway onto County 22, which is a 2-lane blacktop in reasonable condition, and then off County 22 onto a gravel road that climbs into a series of low hills that I don't have the elevation data for, but that feel like a natural defensive position. High ground, with clear sight lines in multiple directions. The kind of terrain that a group with resources and tactical awareness would choose for a permanent settlement. The approach road ends at a gate, not a chain-link gate, a welded steel gate, serious, mounted on concrete posts with vehicle barriers on both sides. 2 guards at the gate, armed and not hiding that fact, but standing in a posture that's watchful rather than hostile. One of them approaches the truck. I stop and put my window down. He looks at me, at Patty, at the truck. He says, "North Station sent word you were coming. Cal Merritt and Patricia Alden." "That's right," I said. "Welcome to Clearwater." He looked at us both. "How are you doing?" The question was routine, a standard processing question, but it had been a while since anyone had asked it in any form. "Tired," I said. "Otherwise fine." He nodded. He stepped back and called something to the other guard, and the steel gate swung inward. I drove through. The facility was everything they'd said, and some things they hadn't. The main structure was a former agricultural research station, long, low buildings, a greenhouse complex that had been expanded significantly, the kind of infrastructure that said someone had looked at this place a long time ago, with specific eyes. 87 people, Dr. Forsyth had said. Looking at the activity level as we drove in, it felt about right. Enough people that there was constant low-level activity. Not enough that the movement felt chaotic. Dr. Forsyth met us near the main building. In daylight and proximity, she was exactly what the voice had suggested. Direct, economical with words. The sort of person who doesn't waste time on pleasantries because there's too much to do, and she respects your time enough to skip them. She showed us the facility. The greenhouse running 3 crop cycles on an adjusted schedule. The wind turbines on the hill above the compound. The medical station where Patty stood in the doorway and looked around with the expression of someone whose specific expertise has just been given proper tools for the first time in months. The community meeting space, a converted building where the current population was organized into working groups with actual task assignments. A bulletin board, not the highway board, an interior one, with the daily schedule and current project lists, and a section for incoming information from other survivor locations. A network of verified contacts that Dr. Forsyth had been building since day 60. She showed me the radio station. A proper setup, multiple bands, a schedule of contacts, a log going back weeks. She showed me the vehicle bay, a converted storage building with 8 vehicles in various states of maintenance. A fuel management log that told me instantly, just from looking at it, that someone in this facility had real logistics sense. The tracking system for fuel consumption versus reserve was something I'd have designed myself. She showed me the maps, road condition maps, infected concentration maps, supply location maps, all of it annotated in multiple hands, multiple contributors adding information as they came in. And then she showed me what I hadn't expected, a wall. Near the back of the main building's interior, a wall where people had posted photographs, notes, addresses, names. Not a memorial wall exactly, a contact wall. Places and people they were still trying to reach. Families, specific communities. The kind of information that you only post if you believe there's a point in posting it, which means you believe there is still a world in which information like that matters. I looked at the wall for a while. I found a pen and a piece of paper from the pile on the table below the wall. I wrote, Dale Prentice, Prentice Metal Recovery Scrapyard, County Road 7, Killian Junction. Alive as of day 153. Knows the area. Will not relocate, but is an asset. I pinned it to the wall. Then, below it, after a moment, I wrote, Trailer, 3rd from south fence, intact. Supplies, solar, water collection, secure door system. Available if needed. I put the pen down. Dr. Forsyth was watching from a few feet away. She said, You're going to want a role here, something to do. You're not the kind of person who can just be here without a function. Logistics, I said. Supply routing, vehicle management, convoy planning. I know freight networks. I can see how a supply run should work before you run it. She nodded, like this was what she'd expected. We also, she said, need someone to organize our outlying supply caches. Places we've identified but haven't built out properly. Staging areas. A pause. Ideally places where a person could lay low if a run went wrong. Resupply points. I looked at her. Trailers, she said simply. We've got access to more trailers than we have converted ones. I thought about the manifold drainage problem, the way I'd do it differently the 3rd time. The shorter run on the secondary pipe, the better gravity angle. That, I said, I can help with. There are things I want to write down before I lose the specific texture of them. The way the scrapyard sounds at 3 a.m., when the breathing is right and the chain is tapping, and you know without looking that everything is as it should be. The sight glass on the water tank, and how knowing the level without getting up was one of the small dignities of that life. Dale's face when he said go, and meant it entirely. The map that Patty drew before I got there, with her observations layered on top of mine, the record of 2 people watching the same yard from different angles and finding the same things worth looking at. The 4 people in the container, sitting on the floor with their backs against the wall, doing the specific math of a long confinement, and waiting for the number that meant they could move. The man who said, about time, like it was a reasonable thing to say to someone who'd just vaulted a 6-foot fence in the dark, on the edge of a facility that could have gone badly at any moment. The truck on County 7, going north, Patty asleep in the passenger seat, and the sky lightening in the east. I am a logistics person. I think in terms of routes and loads and timing and risk profiles. I think about where things are and where they need to be, and what's between those 2 points that you need to plan around. I've done it with freight for 20 years, and I've been doing it with survival for the past 5 months. The scrapyard was the right place. The trailer was the right shelter. The invisibility strategy was the right strategy for a specific phase of this, a phase that needed what I had: patience, attention to detail, the willingness to be nobody in a world that kept asking people to be somebody. But phases change. They always change. The freight logistics lesson that I never had to say out loud because it was always obvious was this: the smartest thing you can do is build your route around what's coming, not around what's here now. You don't plan the cargo, you plan the road. The road right now goes through Clearwater. I'll see where it goes from there. And there will be trailers. There are always trailers. I know how to build them now. Somewhere on the North Road, around the 90-mile mark on the way to Clearwater, Patty was awake and watching the road, and I was driving with the window cracked to catch the cool air that comes in the early morning, before the day builds heat, and she said something that I've been turning over since. She said, "What happens when the trailers don't work anymore?" I thought about it for a while. The road was clear ahead, the blue markers ticking past on the fence posts, the sun doing its early work on the horizon. I said, "Then you figure out what works next." She looked at the road. "You've been doing that," she said. It wasn't a question. "Since day one," I said. "Since before day one." She was quiet again. We went another mile before she said, "What were you before?" "Before the trucking." I thought about this. "The trucking was before," I said. "I've been doing it since I was 26. But before that, before you were always moving, I was someone who didn't know yet that always moving was the right thing for me." She watched the fence posts go by, the blue markers, the way the road curved slightly and then straightened again. "I was a nurse," she said, "before the outbreak. And then during the outbreak, I was a nurse trying to keep people alive in a facility that was filling up with dead people. And then I was running. And then I was hiding." A pause. "I don't know what I am now. I know what I can do, but I don't know if that's the same thing." "You're someone who drew a map," I said, "and who stayed in a scrapyard because it was the right place to be, and who figured out that the same group I was watching was worth watching, and who came up with a cleaner plan for getting that radio than I had." She looked at me. "You remembered the plan. It was a good plan." She turned back to the window. Outside, the sun was fully up now, low and cold, doing the specific thing it does in this latitude at this time of year, where it lights everything without warming it. This flat white illumination that makes the world look like a photograph of itself. I drove north. Behind us, 140 miles, the chain was tapping on the post in the southwest corner of the scrapyard, because the wind was still coming from the same direction it had been coming from for days, and it would keep tapping whether anyone was there to hear it or not. And somewhere in the northeast corner of that yard, 2 men were buried in the ground, and an old man was standing at his booth door, with his hand on the handle and the key to a padlock that nobody had bothered him about in 4 months. And in the third trailer from the south fence, locked from the inside with a pneumatic bar system, the solar array was charging the battery bank in the morning light, and the water tank was holding 45 gallons, and the notebook was on the shelf next to the cot, and the last entry said, "Day 149, back." I haven't closed the book.